started boxing at about the age of 7 in Puerto Rico, and then finally moved to Texas. And I continued to box as a teenager. I competed over 100 amateur fights. Turned pro at the age of 17 when I was still in high school as a senior. It was something that I loved. As a fighter, I didn't look for fights. In the streets, if I saw trouble, I walked the other way.
In his 20s, Ramon marries and has 3 kids, but the union deteriorates over time.
I used to travel a lot. I had to went to a lot of tournaments, boxing tournaments around the nation. So it puts a lot of stress on a relationship.
In 2000, after 9 years together, Ramon's wife files for divorce.
When I first got divorced, I was really, really hurt. I didn't want to get divorced. I loved my kids. I wanted to keep my family together.
I grew up with my parents separated. Spent a lot of time with my dad on the weekends. For a long time, I was his only little girl.
His children are his life. They're gonna come first, but I think he was ready to enjoy himself.
On a beautiful summer evening in 2007, Ramon heads to Mi Luna nightclub.
This guy had told me about this restaurant, The Woodlands, which is a neighborhood north of Houston. 10 in the evening, they played live music. I pulled out a little Versace sweater that I had, thought it was like cool, looking nice. And I went out there, the place was packed, and I noticed this beautiful lady on the dance floor. She had long black hair, beautiful skin. I remember her wearing a tight black mini dress and high heels. She was a knockout. Next thing I know, I see her coming towards me, and she steps on my toe. I just went down in pain. She started telling me, I'm sorry. I'm saying Spanish, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to, step on you, all that. And all I could do is look up at her and just say, would you dance with me? So she kind of asked me what I did, and I told her that I work with kids and use boxing as a tool to keep kids on the right path. And she loved it. She said, oh, wow, that's excellent, man. You're helping kids, and I love boxing.
Maria Durantes, nicknamed Lulu, tells Ramon that she came from Mexico with her 2 children, Luis and Carla. She cleans houses to support her family.
She knew how to work hard so that she could make a living to better her life and her kids' life in this country. And I was very impressed by that.
He seemed happy. He's got this big old smile on his face all the time when she's around. I liked her a lot. I wanted to have her body. What do I have to do to look like that? And we got along fine.
As a man, you want to be treated right, and I treated her right too. It would just go way above and beyond for me. Put it this way, I get up in the morning, she had my full breakfast set on the table. I was her king.
My mother loved it. Someone's taking care of her son.
It progressed pretty quick because she started supporting me a lot in boxing. We dated for about a year and a half. And I was beginning to think, this is the right person for me. The day that I asked her to marry me, I went down to one knee, pulled the ring out of my back pocket, and she just started crying and crying. And I asked her to marry me. And of course, she said yes. And she was so happy that I asked her to marry me. I proposed to her on that weekend, and the following week she was already making arrangements for our marriage.
We had no idea he was getting married. We didn't even know he was going to propose to her. I knew nothing about it. So that was like a gut punch. And I remember crying, and I was like, what?
We got married at the courthouse in Montgomery County. And then after that, we had a get-together at my sister's house. My older sister, Mari, she opened up her house for a celebration of our wedding. It was great having everybody over. The mother had cooked Puerto Rican food. We danced, and she danced with everybody, and her kids were there. Her mother, her brother-in-law, her sister. It was a great night of partying and celebration.
But not for everyone.
We all decided not to go. We were not interested. Nobody was happy about it. So my brothers and I stayed behind.
No, my kids did not come to my wedding. That was very difficult for me. I can't blame them for anything. It was all my fault. At that time, Lulu was starting to put a wedge between me and my kids.
It was a warning sign, but not the only one.
One red flag in hindsight that bothers me was the day of our marriage at the courthouse. Her mother came up to me and gave me a hug and just whispered in my ear, "Now she's your trouble," and walked away. And I didn't think much of it, but she was trying to tell me something from the beginning.
In 2010, Ramon and Lulu opened a gym together, Woodlands Boxing and Fitness.
Hi, my name is Ramon Sosa.
I am Lulu Sosa.
Welcome to Woodlands Boxing and Fitness.
I was wanting my own gym, and I had a vision on how to run it, where it could be prosperous. She wanted our business to be successful, and she would tell me, you know, I'm not stopping until we make this thing work smoothly and we're making money. It was all 100%, let's do this and support each other.
He put a lot of energy, blood, sweat, and tears into that place.
I had a day job too, but then always had time for the gym because that was my biggest thing. We had to work during the day, and then training people till 8, 9 in the evening.
He was also, you know, living out his dream. He had this so-called beautiful wife, he always would say, and, you know, he had it all.
We bought a big house, 2-story home. We had nice toys, and financially everything was great. And those were the happy times when she saw the money. She was very, very mindful of everything that was spent. I mean, every receipt had to be accounted for, everything. When it came to spending money on her and her kids, there was never an issue. But when it came to me spending anything on my kids, I don't know what it was that bothered her so much about Mia, that she just hated that every time I brought her into conversation. Mia was competing in a pageant, Miss Teen San Antonio. When I told Lulu that I was going to buy a dress for her and I told her how much it was going to cost, oh my gosh, she just went through the roof. She said, well, why are you spending all that money on her for? She's not going to win anyway. Who would say something like that, you know? After our 3rd year of marriage, she applied for her American citizenship. And I remember going to the immigration office and signing a bunch of papers so that she can become an American citizen, her kids, and she even applied for her mother. So they were all becoming American citizens because of me. One afternoon, I get home and I see all these American flags, and you know, it looks like there was a little party at the house. And she says, say hello to your new American citizen wife. And I was so upset. I said, wait, you mean to tell me that you guys had the celebration and you didn't invite me? I would ask her very bluntly, so let me get this straight. You came to this country for one reason only, to become an American citizen and become prosperous, get money, and now that you have it, you know, you don't need me. She says, look at me. I'm beautiful. I can get any man I want, but I picked you. I picked you because I love you. I love everything about you. I could have had any man I want.
Now that I think about it, they were probably having issues. And he said, let me just take her on a trip to make her happy.
Ramon takes Lulu on a vacation to Puerto Rico to show her the island.
We having a good time. This particular evening, we were on the bed at the hotel. We were having drinks. She was going through social media and she sees a picture of my daughter, Mia. And she made a comment of, you know, look at your daughter looking like a prostitute. I was like, what did you just say? She kept saying, well, look at her. She was like a little prostitute the way she's dressed.
They get into an argument, but to the point where, you know, I'm gonna call you mother. Nothing she says to my mother is gonna upset her, but it upset Ramon that, you know, why are you bothering my mother with this?
And she calls my mother, and I grabbed the phone away from her, saying, no, hang up the phone. I hang up the phone. And what does she do? She runs out of the room.
A few minutes later, there's a knock on the door.
So security comes up and asks what's going on. And then I see Lulu outside our door, the room door. I look at her and I see that she has scratches on her hands and stuff. And I'm like, what happened to you?
And I see that look in her face that she's up to something. There's something going on.
Lulu has made her first move in a high-stakes battle with Ramon that will put his life on the line.
She had a plan. From the very beginning, I believe she had a plan. She wasn't going to give up easy.
She just knew how to manipulate people so easily, and I fell for it.
On vacation in Puerto Rico, Ramon Sosa is reeling. His wife Lulu complains to hotel security that he physically abused her during an argument.
Security guards stayed with me inside the room. He wanted to hear my version of the story while Lulu was outside with the other security guard. And the security guard that was with me in the room said, one of you guys is gonna have to sleep in a separate room tonight. And I never forget him telling me, watch out for that lady. The next morning after we had that incident in Puerto Rico, I was in the lobby and then Lulu walked up to me and she had her luggage and I noticed that she had some kind of paper and envelope and she showed me that it was a report that she had written out of what happened the previous night. And I looked at it and I was very, very, very upset because it was all a lie. She was just trying to get me in trouble.
Plane, we were sitting next to each other, and I never forget, she fell asleep with her head on my shoulder, and then she had her hand crossed on her lap. I would just stare at her hands with those scratches, and I'm like, this is one crazy lady,
I think Ramon is one that always puts a good face to everything, and he wanted to make this work. He tried his best. I could see him putting a lot of effort into, things working out. I just saw more tension, less smiling, less getting together with everybody. And you could tell, you can see her facial expression that there was higher tension. Ramon too, you could see that they were trying to avoid each other.
Holding on to hope for his relationship, Ramon books a second vacation, this time to Mexico, so he and Lulu can visit her family.
She had detailed every location that we were supposed to go to, and she had specific places that she wanted to take me.
There was one particular location that she had on the itinerary, a place called Tepito.
Ramon has never heard of Tepito, but he gets a gut instinct that it's a place he shouldn't visit.
Tepito, in Mexico City. Arguably the most dangerous black market in the world.
She told me that it was a location where there's a lot of poor people that live there, but you can find anything you want. There's a lot of knockoffs that people make there, and they're very cheap. And I was like, but why do you want to take me there? And thank God that we never went. And later on, I understand why.
Back in Texas, things go from bad to worse as the fighting continues.
I was at home with her son, and we got into a back and forth. He had issues. He had a lot of issues with school, misbehaving and getting in trouble, hanging out with the wrong kind of people. So I was very, very tired of his shenanigans. I never put a hand on him, but I got very, very close to him, and it was on his face, and he just broke down, started crying, and went upstairs to his room. Later on that afternoon,
Lulu walked into the house. I was just watching my boxing match, and out of nowhere, she throws a right hand.
In boxing, we have this saying that the punch that hurts the most is the punch that you don't see. She busted my lip. I believe she was looking for me to retaliate, to find a way to have me arrested or some kind of way have me taken out of the home, but I wasn't gonna hit her. So I just went to the bathroom and just stared at myself, looking at the blood, coming down the side of my mouth.
Asking myself, what kind of relationship have I gotten myself into?
And I believe that she just was using me, and there's no other way of putting it. And once she found a way to get, everything she wanted from me, and as quick as she did, she said, I don't need you anymore.
From here, things escalate quickly.
She started to spread false rumors about me to members around the gym, telling them that I was abusive, physical, mentally, abusing her kids, that I was a drunk, and then she's telling parents of kids for my nonprofit, don't believe everything that I say. I'm embezzling money. I'm not what they think. It was just enough, for me to say, you know what, this is not gonna work out. So finally, February 2015, I get served with divorce papers.
What's worse, Lulu still shows up at the gym every day.
Even though we were working in the same gym, and it was like oil and water.
Just when Ramon hits his lowest point, he reconnects with an old friend from the gym. His name is Mundo.
He wanted to be a boxer when he was young or be involved with boxing, but he never had the opportunity. He lived in the east side of Houston at the time when he was young, growing up, and he got involved with gangs. Then later on, he was in prison. But he's a very, very tough guy, but when he came out of prison, he wanted to change his life. And when he became part of my team with the kids at the gym, the kids loved him. He changed his whole life around.
My dad, he would pick us up from school and then take us to the gym. That's how I met Mundo. He was just one of the guys my dad trained. I mean, he would talk to us, he was nice.
I think Mundo is someone that's real grateful to what Ramon, did for him in the time that he was having difficulties. He appreciates the help Ramon gave him and the guidance.
But Lulu is about to test the limits of Mundo's loyalty.
She started helping us on the weekends. Once she found out how beneficial he was to us, she started liking Mundo. Lulu starts having a lot more conversations with Mundo.
It got his ears perked up when he starts hearing Lulu making fun of Ramon and, saying all kinds of ugly things about Ramon.
I was driving home this particular morning and I get a phone call from Mundo. I answer it, I said, hey, what's going on, Mundo? And Mundo says, hey, Pops, I got some hard news for you. Lulu wants you dead.
Mundo overheard Lulu's daughter telling Lulu that there was a kid in the gym that has a family member in Mexico that kills people for money. And Lulu responded by, maybe we can use him. Mundo walked up to Lulu and asked her, you mean you want him to go away like this? He made the pistol sign. You want him to go away like this? And she said, yeah. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, I got the people that can do the job. And she said, okay, let's talk.
But Mundo has a plan, and after they talk, he calls Ramon.
He said, all I'm gonna do is just have conversations with her, meet with her, and record everything and see how far she's willing to go with it.
Ramon and his wife have been having difficulties. She called the police out there several times alleging domestic violence. And he called me one morning and said, Lulu's trying to find somebody to kill me. I had seen enough of this lady by that point to take this very seriously. My advice was hang up right now and call the sheriff, which he did.
I made an appointment with the sheriff department and talked to the deputy, and he basically said to me that, look, that's not enough evidence. You guys are going through a divorce. She could be saying that just out of being upset, with you. But if he's recording her and bring all those recordings in, and then the DA can make a case out of it or find some kind of cause. But right now it's just your word against hers.
Mundo starts recording, you know she was making plans about life insurance. It's all greed. It's all greed. When I heard those tapes, I'm like, I can't believe it. I'm in shock.
There was one recording where she's laughing with Mundo and giggling, telling Mundo, like, hey, this is how I'm gonna cry when the police comes and tells me that he's dead. And she starts giggling. So she's already practicing how she's gonna cry. And another one that really bothered me was about the trip that we took to Mexico. She tells Mundo that the plan was that we were supposed to get abducted and they were gonna let Lulu go and they were gonna hold me for ransom and then take me away. The place where everything was gonna happen was gonna be in Tepito, the place that I didn't want to go to.
You know, I've seen the pictures. They seem very happy. But I heard in one of the recordings, she mentions that she just didn't have the heart to disappear him while they were in Mexico.
And here I was having a great time with her family. And in her head, she was trying to find a way to have me killed. This lady was very, very, very evil. Mundo came to the point where he had to ask her for money. He said, I'm gonna ask you for money for a gun to commit the crime. And I'm also gonna let her know that I have the people that are gonna do the job.
¿Qué pasó, Lulu? Nada, pues nomás ellos, bueno, con lo que usted ofreció, pues de perdido saben que todavía está en serio que quiere que lo maten, todo también.
Sí. No, sí, definitivo. O sea, de que se lo eche, que se lo eche. No vale madre, eso, ¿no? Y de que les voy a pagar.
Now, Ramon is pulled into Mundo's plan.
Mundo told me, look, I need you to go buy a burner phone and we're gonna text back and forth and Lou's gonna think that you're the hitman. He told me, how to talk gang, that language that they talk. And that's what we did back and forth. I texted to her, are you ready? I need the money. I need at least $200 to buy the toy. And she said yes. It was intense. And the whole time she had no idea that it was me. And once Mundo got the $200, we thought that was enough evidence to take to the local police. When I told them the story, they separated us, me and Mundo. They heard his side of the story, they heard my side.
The Houston police bring Ramon and Mundo's evidence to the prosecutor's office.
I first heard about this case was when the Precinct 3 Constable's office came to set up a meeting with me to talk about it. Ramon had come to them and reported that his wife, Maria Sosa Lulu, was trying to kill him, that they felt that Ramon was credible. Ramon had some audio recordings between Mundo and Lulu. Anything that Ramon or Mundo brought us, a jury or a judge is going to look at it with an eye of suspicion because it's not coming from law enforcement. It's coming from the person who's actually involved in the case, who has every reason to be lying or who has every reason to set Lulu up.
Prosecutor Blackburn decides to reach out to the FBI.
They assign an FBI agent to work on the case with us. They have an officer that they want to use to do the undercover work that has experience doing it. He's a Spanish speaker, he looks the part, he plays the part. But not only that, they have all the equipment. They have the undercover equipment, the cameras, the microphones that you need, the vehicles, and the surveillance teams that you need when you run one of these operations. Until we can actually have Mundo introduce our hitman to Lulu and see what she does and see if she actually even participates, we really don't know what we have at this point. Once that did happen, it was a very quick meeting in the parking lot of an academy. Mundo and our undercover officer drove to the academy. There was about a 10-person surveillance team that was surrounding them, set up all over the parking lot. Mundo gets out and goes and speaks with Lulu. Everything's being recorded. Everything's being videotaped. It is a very fluid situation. Once they make contact with the target and they're speaking with them, you don't know how it's going to go. You don't want to entrap the person. So You have to be able to determine, is this someone that really wants this done? Or is this just a scared lady who doesn't know what to do and is at her wit's end because law enforcement hasn't helped her in the past? Does she really want him killed? Or does she just want him beaten up? Does she just want him scared? Our undercover was a big guy, long black hair, tattoos. She loved talking to him. You could tell she was flirting with him. It wasn't something that she was uncomfortable with at all. He asked her straight out, do you want us to just beat him up? Do you want us just to scare him? Because we can do that. Her automatic response was, no, he's making my life miserable.
Este güey lo quieres madreado, o quieres que lo quieres acabado, lo quieres muerto, o quieres que nos hagamos una putiza.
No, a mí sirve más muerto que estar poniendo la vida.
Once we heard that, we knew that we were dealing with someone who really wanted her husband dead. Well, what makes this a solicitation of capital murder versus a solicitation of just murder is that you're willing to pay someone to kill Ramon. So we had to have what's called remuneration. Something of value that Lulu was willing to give in order to have Ramon killed. In this case, the CI asked what she had. She was able to give us watches, keychains, a diamond-studded boxing glove of Ramon's. She offered to let us have Ramon's truck after we killed him. And then she even went to the ATM and got out, I believe it was $1,000 out of the ATM, and gave it to us. So at that point, she'd committed the offense.
Lulu wanted me dead as soon as possible. Her intentions were that I was murdered before the divorce was finalized, or else my kids would get everything. So she wanted me dead soon.
A lo mejor ellos dicen, ¿sabes qué? Ya, firmamos el divorcio. Ese es el problema.
Entonces lo quieres rápido, entonces.
Lulu Sosa has just crossed a line by offering money for a hit on her husband. But the prosecution wants an airtight case.
So one of the big hurdles that you always have in these type of cases, once you get them into court, is the defendant now saying, look, I never meant for this to happen. I was scared once I got myself involved. I didn't know what to do. And in this case, you don't have, your defendant's not a 6'5", 250-pound man. It's a small, petite, attractive female who's going to look good in front of a jury.
They told me, here's the deal, Ramon. Right now we have enough information, enough evidence to arrest Lulu. But the thing is that, she's a beautiful lady. She's a mother. She has never been in any trouble. And we don't want to take any chances of going to a jury trial and have one of the jurors feel sorry for her. We need this to be a slam dunk case.
Prosecutors tell Ramon that they need him to do one more thing to secure their case.
Depending on who your victim is and who your target is, you can stage their murder. I always want to try to put a photo that's a staged photo of their loved one in front of them to see what the reaction is.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I said, repeat that again? You're gonna take a picture of me dead. How is that gonna work? And he said, we're gonna put some makeup on, take a picture, and then we're gonna show it to her and record it. And that's gonna be the evidence that we're gonna show the jury, her reactions. They told me, I need you to go home and get clothes for 3 days because we're gonna hide you. We don't wanna take any chances of anybody knowing where you're at.
Reluctantly, Ramon Sosa agrees to stage his own death.
I find out that these guys have looked up how to make bullet wounds from a YouTube video they had watched the night before. And I couldn't believe it, but they made it look right.
I remember traveling to the actual gravesite that the authorities had already dug up to take the picture of me dead, thinking in the back of that SUV about my kids, my mother, my father, my family, how upset they were gonna be once they found out that I had to fake my death so Lulu can get arrested. When they put me inside of the grave, they told me to put my hands behind my back, close my eyes, put my head at an angle where they can take pictures. And they even threw dirt on top of my head. I thought that was demeaning too, but that's what they had to do to look as real as possible.
2 weeks after first meeting, the undercover agent again meets up with Lulu, this time to provide proof of Ramon's death and record her reactions.
So it's just our undercover driving to the same location. We pull up, she jumps into his car. She's not scared, she's not upset, and he tells her that they were able to do it successfully. She asked him specifically, did he fight back? Was it painful? Was he scared? So they talk a little bit about the murder itself, and then he shows her the picture on his cell phone, and she starts smiling. And as she's about to leave, she says, he's really dead, he's not getting out of that hole. And our undercover told her, no, he's not, and that's when she basically raised the roof with her hands. I've never seen someone that joyous. When Lulu realized or believed that Ramon was finally dead, the expression that she had and what she did and how she acted, I've never seen that before.
I just happened to answer the phone at the office at the time that she called, and she said, Notice? And I was like, who is this? She goes, this is Lulu. And she says, I'm calling because a coworker of your brother's called me and told me that they haven't seen him. He has not been at work, and that's just not like him. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then, I started texting my brother and texting him and calling him. He would not answer. He would not text me back. Kind of started getting worried. Like, okay, what's going on? And then finally I told one of the managers, I said, look, I need to go home. I have an emergency. And by the time I got over there, the police, the ambulance, and everybody was there. We're like, okay, what happened?
That afternoon, detectives go into the boxing gym. They were investigating a missing persons report. And if she had any information about where he might be, just to see what her reaction would be and how she would act.
Okay, Detective Martinez, the constable's office. I had a few questions for you. Is there somewhere we can talk in private?
Sure, absolutely.
The evidence that we're getting is so we can show a judge and a jury how manipulative she is, how cunning she is, how cold she is, and how good of a liar she is.
Mr. Sosa hasn't been to work today?
That's what they told me. I received a call today from Byron, and that's his friend.
His friend at work?
At work.
Okay. When's the last time you saw Mr. Sosa?
She now knows that she's standing in front of two detectives. They're questioning her about her husband's disappearance. That's the first time you see her getting rattled, getting nervous, shuffling through papers.
Wednesday 15th, the last day.
That's the last time you saw him?
That's the last time I saw. Then I contact Norris Kenya. This is Ramon's sister. This is her number, but she hung up on me. Like,
this is his sister?
Yes.
Okay.
It's like, hey Norris, listen, Byron called me this morning. So I just...
She's still playing the part.
Okay, Miss Sosa, stand up, please. You're under arrest. Okay, you're under arrest.
Why?
Ma'am, it's okay. Okay, no, vámonos.
Háblale a Julio, por favor, está.
Ramon Sosa is still in hiding when he gets the news from the police.
Then I got the call. They had arrested her. And when I got that call, it was a mixture of emotions. I sat on the edge of the bed, and tears started coming down my eyes, and I couldn't explain why. I don't know if there were tears of happiness or tears of anger.
Ramon's family is still in the dark and has no idea where he is.
Ramon never told me what the plan was. So I'm like, why is she looking for Ramon? I start calling Ramon, paging Ramon, he's not calling me back. I'm starting to really worry.
They brought me back to the police station. My story was headline news. in Houston.
Hitman to kill her husband.
Who, at the investigators he was working with, Sosa met with the undercover agent again.
As soon as I got, my phone back, I tried to call my mother.
There was breaking news on TV with Lulu's face on it saying hired to kill in Montgomery County.
41-year-old Maria Sosa is behind bars after deputies say she tried to hire a hitman to kill her husband.
My mom was hysterical.
And my father answered the phone. And in the background, I could hear my mother crying. Just, the kind of cry you hear at funerals. And it was very difficult to hear my mother, the way she was just crying and crying. She thought that Lulu had killed me.
And then everybody started coming, and my brother got there, and he started crying, and then Mundo got there.
When my mom saw Mundo come in the door, she just ran to him, hugged him, and thanked him, and she was saying to him, thank you so much, Mundo, for saving my son's life.
The Sosa family rejoices in the moment, but is Ramon truly out of danger? No one knows if Lulu will send someone else after him.
For the next few weeks, I would sleep in my own bed with a loaded shotgun, and I had a 9mm gun loaded in my vehicle. I was like a ticking bomb at all times. I didn't know what to expect. I was very, very upset, and anything could set me off. I was afraid of myself, to be honest with you.
The next ordeal for the Sosa family is facing Lulu in court.
So once she's been taken into custody and charged with solicitation of capital murder, now the prosecution of her happens. Her case gets filed into court. Is she going to plead guilty? Is she going to want a trial? And how much time she's going to spend in prison?
I remember going to her first court hearing. It brought me back to how she used to dress all the time when we went out, and how she loved wearing nice clothes, nice heels all the time. She looked, always spectacular. She loved people to notice her when she walked in the room.
Sad to see this beautiful woman in this jumpsuit. It breaks my heart. I don't wish that on anybody, to see somebody all chained up like that.
So after the defense came and was able to review all of the evidence against her, they came asking for an offer. And we were eventually able to agree to allow her to plead to solicitation of murder and receive a sentence of 20 years in prison.
There's so much evidence against her that if she would have tried to go to a jury trial, I think she would have received life in prison. She never looked at me once. In all the hearings that I went to, she never looked at me once. Her last hearing when she was sentenced, the judge let me speak. And I remember saying to the people that were there, nobody in here is perfect. We have all made mistakes. We've all made mistakes. And I told Lulu, I forgive you. I told her, I forgive you.
I just couldn't believe that he was saying that he could forgive her and that he was gonna be okay and that he's gonna move on. And how do you say that to somebody who just planned to have you murdered? But that was his way of moving forward, and that helped me move forward as well.
Once I forgave her, I was able to walk out of the courtroom in peace. The last thing I remember was the sound of the chains as she walked away.
Ramon's done a really good job of working with the Pro Board and with the Texas Department of Corrections and protesting her parole on multiple occasions. She has not received parole, and she's still in prison. Hopefully she's learned her lesson. The likelihood that she'll do it again or try to do it again is very minimal, but you never want to say never.
After Lulu was arrested, people were scared to come back to the gym, so the memberships dropped tremendously.
In 2017, Ramon closes the gym and files for bankruptcy. But even losing his dream doesn't dim his enthusiasm for his new life.
I was able to write a book. I walked to my own grave. It has also helped me a lot. Writing that book, it's been great to use my story for something positive. And that means a lot to me now. My relationship with my kids is a lot better now. With Mitchell, with Chris, and with Mia. I try to talk to them just about every day. That wedge that Lulu created between us, it was very difficult. And again, I can't blame nobody but myself. It hasn't been easy, but it has gotten a lot better. I have 3 grandkids now. They're my life.
He's doing so much better, and he's so happy. His best is yet to come.
I am wonderfully in love with someone now. I'm engaged. Life is great for me now. And I will forever, ever be indebted to Lulu.
It begins with a sound no one truly remembers, yet everyone swears they heard a sharp metallic snap echoing through a narrow Berlin alley in the last hours of a cold November night. A sound that could have been a breaking bottle, a slammed door, or a warning no one recognized until it was too late. A sound that would mark the beginning of a mystery that would coil itself around the city for years, weaving through police archives and late-night conversations like a ghost refusing to be buried. The streets were wet that night, slick with rain that reflected the neon glow of cafes closing early and U-Bahn stations emptying like drained veins after the last wave of passengers disappeared into the undercity. Berlin was quieter than usual, almost expectant, as if holding its breath for a story it knew was coming. And somewhere inside that silence, in a dim passage between 2 shuttered apartment blocks in Friedrichshain, a life vanished without anyone seeing how, why, or who was responsible. A cold case born from a single instant of darkness. The victim's name would be whispered for years, a young woman with a laugh that friends said you could hear across a crowded street, a graduate student studying forensic psychology, ironic, in a way that still unsettles detectives who later reviewed her file. She disappeared between one streetlight and the next, leaving behind only the things that made the police look twice her backpack lying open but not rifled through her phone, intact with the last call unsent, and a faint smear of something on the pavement that the first responders couldn't decide was mudblood, or simply the night playing tricks. No witnesses, no cameras catching the right angle, no footprints that could survive the rain. Just the echo of something violent, something abrupt, something wrong. When officers first arrived, the scene felt almost staged. The air carried the thick scent of wet concrete, and the sound of dripping gutters filled the narrow gap between buildings. Flashlights cut through the shadows in sharp white strokes, illuminating graffiti-broken railings and a lone bicycle leaning against a wall, as if someone left it behind mid-flight. One officer swore he felt watched, as though eyes were following his every movement from behind cracked windows and rain-warped curtains, but when he looked up, nothing stirred. The city towered above the crime scene, indifferent and massive, swallowing the moment without offering answers. A typical Berlin night, but with an undertone that felt colder than the weather. The investigation began before sunrise. Detectives questioned residents who opened their doors with sleepy irritation, insisting they heard nothing unusual. Some pointed to the usual suspects, late-night drinkers, tourists, stumbling out of clubs, neighborhood teenagers. But even in their excuses, there was an undercurrent of fear, as if they sensed something darker at play. A few claimed they saw a figure lurking in the shadows earlier, someone tall wearing a hood moving too quickly. Others contradicted that, entirely insisting the alley had been empty for hours. And because truth bends easily when wrapped in darkness, every testimony felt both useful and meaningless, like puzzle pieces from different boxes scattered across the same table. By midday, the victim's name appeared on police radio transmissions, and her face prepared to appear on tomorrow's newspapers. She had been well known in academic circles, with a reputation for sharp insight into criminal behavior. Professors spoke of her as a mind that could read between lines. Others missed someone drawn to the psychology of violence, but never imagining she'd become entangled in it herself. Her friends described her final days as normal routine, unremarkable, except for one detail too vague to ignore: She had mentioned feeling like she was being followed, describing subtle glances on the street footsteps behind her that stopped when she turned, and a sense of unease that crept into conversations without offering explanation. No one took it seriously. Berlin is a city of sounds, shadows, and strangers. Paranoia blends naturally into its atmosphere. But after that night, her words dug themselves into the investigation like splinters no one could remove. Authorities combed through CCTV footage, dragging hours of grainy recordings through enhancement software that never quite delivered what they needed. They saw her walking home, umbrella in hand coat, wrapped tightly around her as the rain thickened. They saw her turn into the alley where she always cut across to save a few minutes. What they didn't see was anyone behind her. No shadow trailing after, no suspicious figure, no clue. She simply stepped into view and never stepped out. The alley swallowed her without explanation, a black hole in the middle of the city. Detectives walk the route again and again, replaying her final moments in their minds, as though repetition could force the truth to reveal itself. They pressed gloved hands against damp brick, searching for signs of struggle. They measured distances, re-examined the angle of each streetlight, listened to the rain dripping off metal staircases, as if the pattern might hold a clue. One detective paused longer than the others near a rusted drain pipe where he found the faintest trace of fabric, a thread no longer than a fingernail caught in the jagged edge of a bolt. Lab results later confirmed it matched the victim's coat. But the placement told the detectives something new. She didn't simply disappear. She was pulled. That detail shifted everything, sending the investigation spinning into a frenzy. Officers were dispatched to knock on doors again, searching for someone who saw or heard anything. They focused on a ground-floor apartment facing the alley where lights had been on close to midnight, but the tenant claimed he had fallen asleep with his headphones on, oblivious to everything. They interviewed a bartender who closed shop early that night due to the storm, but he hadn't seen her. They questioned a delivery driver whose route passed that alley, but he insisted he had been blocks away at the time. Every angle led to another dead end. The case began to chill before it even thawed. As days passed, the absence of answers became a story on its own. Newspapers printed her photo alongside headlines like "Student Vanishes Without a Trace" and "Berlin Mystery Deepens." Online forums erupted with theories, some plausible, many absurd. Strangers claimed to have seen her in train stations, airports, even in other countries. But none of it moved the investigation forward. Her family made public pleas, their voices cracking under the weight of uncertainty. Yet the case grew colder with each passing week. One detective refused to let it go. He had worked cold cases before, too many of them, and he recognized the pattern of a story slipping into the void. He visited the alley at different hours, as if hoping the city itself would reveal something it had hidden. He watched the shadows change with each sunrise and sunset, memorizing every sound, every creak of metal, every click of passing heels on wet pavement. He interviewed residents again, sometimes, more than once, searching for inconsistencies. And one night, long after the official task force had scaled back its presence, he noticed something. A window overlooking the alley. One that had been closed during every visit was now open. The apartment behind that window belonged to someone who had refused to speak earlier. A reclusive tenant who avoided interaction, rarely seen in daylight, someone neighbors described with phrases like odd or quiet or keeps to himself. The detective climbed the staircase, his steps soft, almost cautious. When he knocked, the door remained closed. He knocked again. A faint rustle sounded inside, followed by the click of a lock hesitantly turning. The tenant opened the door just wide enough for one eye to peek through. The detective introduced himself, his voice steady but non-threatening. He asked simple questions, nothing pressing, nothing accusatory. The tenant answered in short sentences, nervous but coherent. Then, almost by accident, a detail slipped. He had been awake the night of the disappearance. That moment changed the air between them. The detective leaned in, not aggressively, but with a focus that made the tenant swallow hard. The man explained he hadn't spoken earlier because he hadn't wanted to get involved. He had his own troubles, his own fears. But he hadn't heard the metallic snap. He hadn't heard footsteps. He hadn't heard a struggle. What he did hear, though something he had dismissed as imagination, was a whisper. A low, hurried voice speaking words he couldn't understand, followed by silence that felt unnatural. A silence that pressed against the walls, heavy and deliberate. The detective asked him to describe the voice. The tenant hesitated, eyes shifting as if replaying the memory. Then he said something that would echo through the investigation for years. It sounded like someone telling another person to be quiet. But it didn't sound angry. It sounded prepared. Prepared. The word carried weight, shaping the theory in a way no evidence had before. This wasn't random. This wasn't spontaneous. Someone had planned something. Someone had waited. Still without a description, without a face, without a name, the case began its slow descent into dormancy. Months passed, then years. Files gathered dust, interviews, faded memories blurred. Detectives were reassigned. The alley changed, new graffiti, new tenants, new shadows. But the cold case lingered in the archives like a wound that refused to close. Berlin kept moving, loud and vibrant, while one unanswered question pulsed quietly beneath its surface. And then years later, just when the story seemed destined to remain frozen forever, someone stepped forward. Someone no one expected, someone who claimed they knew what happened that night. A secret witness emerging from the dark edges of the city, ready to upend everything. It starts with a voice message. No one anticipated a quiet, trembling recording left on the police tip line late on a Tuesday night, spoken by someone who refused to give a name, but insisted the call couldn't wait until morning. A voice that sounded like it had been carrying a burden for far too long, wavering at the edges as though each word was dragged out from a place of fear that had hardened over the years. "I know what happened in Friedrichshain," the caller whispered, breath hitching. "I saw something that night, and someone saw me." Then the line cut abrupt and eerie, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the message itself. The detective who received it, the same one who had once stood alone in that alley rain, pooling at his feet, listened to the recording twice before forwarding it to his supervisor. Something in the caller's tone struck him instantly, the way it carried a mixture of terror and resignation, as if this confession had been locked away inside a decade of sleepless nights. It wasn't the kind of voice that belonged to a prankster or someone seeking attention. It was the voice of someone cornered by their own conscience. Within an hour, a team assembled, tracing the call to a payphone near Ostkreuz, an outdated relic in a city drowning in smartphones, standing like a ghost of another era. By the time officers arrived, the booth was empty, rain dripping from its metal roof like slow tears. No fingerprints, no lingering scent. Nothing but the faint warmth on the receiver, proof someone had been there moments earlier. The secret witness became a mystery within a mystery, a shadow layered on top of a case already consumed by shadows. Detectives pored over surveillance cameras near the payphone, but the angles were terrible. The footage blurry, and the rain had once again blurred outlines into unrecognizable shapes. Still, they caught a glimpse, a hooded figure walking quickly, almost gliding, not quite running, but moving with a purpose that didn't match the late, empty streets. It was impossible to identify the person, but one detail was unmistakable. They kept their head turned away from every camera, as if they knew exactly where each one was. That alone told investigators something chilling. Whoever this witness was, they had spent years staying hidden. The detectives reopened the cold case files, dust rising like exhaled secrets as folders were spread across desks once more. The original photos returned to the light. The alley, the backpack, the thread torn by the drain pipe, the victim's frozen smile in a portrait taken months before she vanished. The detective ran his fingers along the edges of the documents, feeling the weight of years between then and now. Something in his gut tightened at the sense that the city was finally cracking somewhere, releasing pressure built up by silence. But what lay beneath that cracked truth, or another dead end, remained uncertain. Hours after the voicemail, another clue surfaced, this one far more physical. A letter slipped under the door of the police precinct in Mitte, written on aged paper, with ink that had begun to smudge from moisture, perhaps, from the messenger's rain-soaked fingers. There was no envelope, no signature, No identifying marks. Only a short sentence, written in sharp, hurried strokes. Check the basement beneath the old printing factory on Revelerstrasse, a location that had never once appeared in the original investigation. The factory in question had been abandoned since 2004, a hulking brick structure left to rot behind iron gates and layers of graffiti. Locals said squatters used it occasionally, but most avoided it due to rumors of collapsing floors and the stench of mold that seeped from its broken windows. It loomed like a forgotten monument to a lost industry wedged between train tracks and overgrown lots, its silhouette jagged against Berlin's polluted glow. When detectives arrived with flashlights and crowbars, the building greeted them with a gust of cold, stale air, the breath of something long sealed away. Inside, the floors were littered with shattered glass, rusted gears, and old newspapers curled from dampness. The beams creaked with every shift of wind, groaning like a warning. But the basement entrance they sought was hidden a metal hatch beneath a warped wooden table buried under debris. The latch resisted groaning as if protesting the intrusion, and when it finally gave way, a thick wave of air rose from below, heavy with the smell of earth rust and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet. Something that prickled the instinctive part of the human mind that whisper you should not be here. The stairs descended into a darkness so complete the flashlight seemed to struggle against it. Water dripped rhythmically somewhere deeper, each drop echoing like a ticking clock. Dust particles floated like slow-moving stars in the narrow beams of light, revealing walls lined not with machinery or tools, but with soundproofing foam. The space had been converted intentionally and with care into a room designed to swallow noise whole. A room that didn't fit the history of a printing factory. A room that raised more questions than it answered. In the center lay a single object, a metal chair bolted to the floor. Its legs were rusted, but the straps attached to its arms and back were disturbingly intact. Leather hardened but preserved. A camera mount stood nearby, empty but unmistakable in purpose. On the far wall, faint markings were visible, scratches, numbers, tallies, someone counting time, or maybe something else. The discovery electrified the investigation. This wasn't a place someone stumbled into. It was a place built for control, for secrecy, for confinement, for planning. The detective crouched near the chair, fingertips grazing the bolts. The cold of the metal felt unnatural, almost deliberate. On the floor beneath, he spotted something glinting, a small silver charm shaped like a crescent moon. It wasn't rusted. It wasn't dusty. It had been dropped recently, carried perhaps by the witness, or by someone watching the police even now. When forensics arrived hours later, their equipment humming beneath the flickering fluorescent lights they'd set up, they uncovered more traces of blood embedded in the concrete, too degraded for a quick match. Strands of hair caught in one of the bolts preserved enough for DNA testing. Tiny scratches near the chair resembling letters, as if someone had tried to carve a message before giving up. The room pulsed with tension, each discovery tightening the grip of the case around the investigators. Yet none of it explained how the victim had been taken from the alley, transported to this basement, or why the entire setup felt abandoned in haste. It was as if someone had left just before the door opened. That night, the secret witness called again. The same trembling whisper, more urgent this time, more fragmented. "You need to listen," they said. "You're not safe in that place." He comes back. He still watches it. The detectives exchanged glances. The witness wasn't describing a past threat, but a present one. Someone returning to a crime scene, not out of guilt, but out of routine, out of obsession. The detective asked the witness to meet. The voice hesitated, breath quivering audibly through the speaker. "Not yet," they whispered. "He'll know." Then another click, another severed connection. By dawn, the discovery of the basement had leaked. Reporters gathered near the factory, cameras pointed at flashing police tape. Headlines filled the city. New break in cold case, secret room found in abandoned factory. Evidence suggests staged abduction. The public reacted with a mixture of fascination and fear, the kind that spreads quickly in a city used to darkness but still startled when it stares directly into its reflection. The detective returned to the alley where it all began. The morning light cast long shadows from the buildings, and for a moment he imagined he saw the victim's figure walking ahead of him, umbrella tilted, unaware of what waited behind the next turn. He inhaled deeply, letting the cold air burn his lungs, grounding himself in the present. Then he noticed something near the drainpipe where the thread from her coat had been found years ago. Fresh footprints, small and shallow, pressed into last night's thin layer of mud. Not the heavy boots of police officers. Not the pattern of city workers or delivery men. Footsteps that didn't belong. Someone had been there again. Someone who knew the case was reopening. Someone who might have watched from a doorway or behind a curtain, eyes, tracking every move the detectives made. The detective followed the trail until it merged with the city's endless sidewalk patterns, swallowed like everything else. The realization settled deep in his bones. The witness wasn't the only person still tied to this case. Someone else, someone far more dangerous, was moving through Berlin, with them responding to each discovery, adjusting, observing. That night, the detective found something taped to the windshield of his car, a photograph printed on cheap paper. The picture showed the alley, not in 2007, but yesterday. The angle was from above, as if taken from a window. And there, circled in red marker, was the detective himself, standing by the drainpipe. Someone was watching the investigation unfold in real time. Someone wanted them to know, and someone wasn't afraid anymore. The city seemed to tighten overnight, as if Berlin itself felt the shift in the air, a pressure building beneath concrete, a pulse hiding behind the noise of traffic, and the metallic rattle of trams scraping past intersections. The detective drove in silence, the photograph from his windshield lying on the passenger seat, like a threat that had learned how to breathe. Every red light felt longer than usual. Every pedestrian who turned their head seemed to stare a fraction too long. The sense of being watched clung to him like a second skin, heavy and impossible to ignore. Whoever was circling the investigation wasn't improvising. They were calculating, patient, methodical, someone who knew how to study others without leaving traces, someone who had slipped through this city once before and was now doing it again almost effortlessly. He reached the precinct just after dawn, the sky washed in muted gray, the kind of Berlin morning that makes everything look colder than it actually is. The building buzzed with a low urgency, phones ringing, boots echoing across the tiled floor, voices clustered in tense whispers. The discovery of the factory basement had unleashed a storm, and the higher-ups were demanding answers faster than evidence could be processed. News outlets had begun camping outside, turning the entrance into a wall of microphones and questions. But what unsettled the detective more than the journalists was the silence of the witness. No calls since the warning, no messages, no trails to follow. As if the voice had dissolved into the city's labyrinth, leaving only echoes behind. He entered the briefing room where the team was already gathered, eyes pinned to a bulletin board dense with photos, maps, red strings, and handwritten notes. The picture from his windshield sat pinned at the center, now circled in thick black marker. A statement, a provocation. The lead investigator pointed to it, jaw clenched. This is deliberate. Someone wants us to know they're one step ahead. The silent tension spread across the room. A few officers exchanged uneasy glances. Others leaned forward, viewing the picture like a personal insult. But the detective saw something more dangerous: confidence. The kind that comes from knowing you haven't been caught in years. The kind that comes from watching your pursuers fail over and over until the hunt becomes a game you believe you can never lose. Discussion shifted to the factory basement. Forensics found partial footprints in the dust near the chair, too distorted to produce a definitive match. But the pattern suggested someone moving lightly, almost cautiously, as if familiar with the terrain. A glove fiber was found near the stairs, synthetic black common, but cleanly cut as though intentionally left. And the leather straps on the chair showed uneven wear, implying they had been used more than once. Not just in 2007, possibly before, possibly after. The idea that the basement had history, a ledger of secrets buried in silence, sent a ripple of unease through the team. Then came the detail that gripped the room. A faint fingerprint found behind the camera mount too smooth to belong to a hurried intruder, too intentionally placed to be accidental. It wasn't enough to identify a suspect, but it was enough to suggest that whoever used the room had paused, maybe to adjust the camera, maybe to look through the lens, and in that moment left behind the closest thing to a signature they had ever allowed themselves. A ghost leaving a trace, not because they were careless, but because they believed no one would ever find it. After the briefing, the detective slipped out mind-racing. He knew the next step wasn't in the office, or the alley, or even the factory. It was with the witness, the voice trembling between fear and urgency, someone who knew far more than they dared to say. Someone who had been carrying the truth like a weight around their neck for years. But how do you find someone who doesn't want to be found? Someone who has been hiding from the same darkness that now stares back at the investigation. He returned to the payphone at Ostkreuz, the one the witness had used. The rain from the previous night had dried, leaving smudges of dirt along the booth's edges. He stepped inside, observing the scratches on the metal walls, the gum stuck under the shelf, the faint smell of rust mixed with old cigarette smoke. He dialed the tip line number, holding the receiver to his ear as if hoping the witness might sense his presence. Only voicemail answered that low beep, swallowing his breath. He didn't leave a message. Instead, he hung up and looked around, scanning the plaza commuters, rushing bicycles, weaving through crosswalks, shopkeepers opening metal shutters. Ordinary life, unaware of the invisible thread that stretched from this spot to a decade-old disappearance. A woman with a stroller passed by, glancing at him quickly before looking away. A teenager with headphones sat on a bench, bouncing his leg in rhythm to unheard music. A homeless man sorted cans into a plastic bag, his movement slow and deliberate. All ordinary, all benign. Yet the detective felt eyes somewhere, watching, measuring. Something compelled him to check the trash bin beside the payphone. Inside, beneath receipts, coffee cups, and a torn magazine page, he found a folded piece of paper. Not soaked, not dirty, recently placed. His pulse quickened as he opened it. "Stop going to the alley. He's following you." No signature. Same handwriting as the note about the factory. The witness was here. Recently. Maybe watching him even now. He scanned the plaza again, but the faces blended together, turning into an indistinguishable crowd of anonymity. The detective folded the note into his pocket, the weight of it settling beside his growing sense of dread. Someone was trying to help, but someone else was closing in. He returned to the precinct with the note, but before he could show it to the team, the forensics lab called. DNA results from the factory basement were ready. He hurried down the corridor, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead like dying stars. The lab technician met him with a file in hand, expression tight. "We found something," she said. "Not enough for a complete profile, but enough to match against the database." The detective opened the folder, eyes scanning quickly, then froze. The partial match linked to an unsolved assault case from 2005 in Neukölln. Same methods implied same lack of evidence, same mystery. A woman who had survived but refused to speak. A case that died within weeks due to silence. Silence that now felt deliberate. The detective traced the timeline: 2005, an attempted assault. 2007, the disappearance. Then nothing. A long gap. Too long. Unless the perpetrator had moved, changed methods, or found ways to operate without leaving traces. Or unless the witness had been involved in one of those years, making them far closer to the center of the story than they admitted. He pulled up the old case file from Neukölln. The victim's statement had been minimal. A tall figure, masked gloves, strong grip, no words spoken. The only detail she insisted on was the smell of faint mix of oil and printing ink. Printing ink. The old factory. His breath tightened. The basement wasn't chosen randomly. It wasn't a crime scene. It was a ritual site. A place the perpetrator knew intimately, returning to it even after the factory closed. A place of control. A place of comfort. which meant the perpetrator likely had history with the location and employee, a contractor, someone who walked those halls before they were abandoned. He pulled every employment record from the factory archives. Most names were unremarkable workers who left Berlin years ago or were accounted for. But one name caught his eye, someone who had been fired shortly before the factory closed, listed as uncooperative and volatile, someone with a history of minor offenses, someone who had never fully left the district. But the file was incomplete, the address outdated, and the photo grainy. A ghost among ghosts. The detective grabbed his coat and headed out again, this time toward Revellerstrasse, retracing the workers' old roots. The neighborhood had grown louder over the years, clubs, bars, art studios, yet beneath the new facade the bones of the past remained visible. He walked past the factory gates once more, feeling the eyes of the building upon him. A shuttered window creaked somewhere above the wind, pushing it open like a warning. His phone vibrated. Unknown number. He answered. The witness didn't whisper this time. Their voice was sharp, urgent, trembling with something beyond fear, desperation. Stop looking for him, they hissed. You're waking him up? The detective stepped closer to the factory wall, head tilted. Who is he? Silence, then a breath, then barely audible. The reason I never slept. The reason she never came home. The detective pressed, voice steady but burning inside. Why didn't you speak sooner? The witness's reply came like a wound torn open because he wasn't done. Static crackled on the line. A loud, sharp rustle slammed into the audio like the phone hitting pavement. Then footsteps. Then nothing. The call ended. The detective stood frozen, the city noise fading behind him until all that remained was the thumping of his own heartbeat. The witness wasn't just hiding. They were running. And someone very real, very close had finally caught up. As he lowered the phone, he noticed something on the sidewalk near the factory gate. A small object glinting under the dim light. A crescent moon charm. The same shape as the one found in the basement. Still warm. Someone had been here seconds ago. Someone who left in a hurry. Someone who might not have gotten far. The charm lay on the ground like a heartbeat made of metal, still carrying the warmth of the person who had dropped it. The detective crouched, hesitating for half a second before picking it up, feeling the weight of the moment settle into his bones. The air around the factory had changed thicker, heavier, as if the city itself had paused to listen. Somewhere beyond the hum of traffic and the distant rattle of the S-Bahn, there was another sound, the faint scrape of a shoe against gravel. The kind of sound someone makes when they're trying very hard not to be heard. He straightened slowly, eyes sweeping the street. Neon lights flickered off graffiti-covered walls, casting fractured colors over the pavement. A club nearby pulsed with muted bass, its bouncers unaware that just meters away, fear was threading itself through the night. The detective pocketed the charm and took a few careful steps toward the alley beside the factory, narrow, choked with shadows. The perfect place for someone to vanish. The footsteps he'd heard moments earlier had already gone silent, swallowed by the maze of Berlin's back streets. Whoever fled didn't want to be found, but they had lingered just long enough to leave evidence behind. He stepped into the alley, listening for breathing, movement, anything. Instead, he caught something else, a smell. Faint, almost intangible, but unmistakable. Once noticed, the same scent the victim from 2005 had described. Oil and ink. But fresher this time, as if recently transferred from clothing or skin. He followed the trace to a rusted door half hidden by peeling posters. His hand hovered over the metal handle, still warm. He pushed it open, revealing a staircase descending into dimness lit only by a flickering bulb. The walls were coated with dust and soot. Yet someone had been here recently, disturbing the grime in streaks and footprints. He descended one careful step at a time, the air cooling with each meter. Somewhere below, water dripped steadily, the rhythm like a metronome marking the seconds he'd been chasing ghosts. But this time, the ghosts were real, and they were close. At the bottom of the stairs, he found another corridor branching into 3 directions. One led to a service room filled with broken pipes. Another led nowhere, a dead end. The third opened into a long hallway lined with old printing machinery left behind when the factory shut down. Heavy rollers, steel plates, ink-stained vats. It looked like a metallic graveyard, each machine looming like a reminder of forgotten hands. As the detective moved deeper, the hall expanded into a wide chamber with debris scattered across the floor. Empty bottles, torn fabric footprints, multiple sets of them. He knelt studying the shoe prints. One was small, narrow, the witness. The other prints were larger, heavier, made with deliberate steps, and newer. He wasn't alone. A sudden metallic clang echoed from behind one of the old printing presses, loud enough to jolt the detective to his feet. He moved toward the sound hand hovering near the grip of his weapon, but not drawing it yet. Fear destroys accuracy. Calm maintains control. His boots tread softly across the concrete, echoing just faintly enough to let whoever was hiding know he was coming. Then something shifted, a shadow peeling away from a machine. The detective froze, but the figure didn't attack. Instead, it darted through a side passage, fast and agile, disappearing into darkness. Not the perpetrator. Not from the way it moved. That was panic, not power. The witness. He followed quickly but carefully, the passage turning sharply before opening into a small maintenance room. Pipes rattled along the ceiling, the floor stained with old oil. In the corner, someone hid behind a stack of wooden pallets. Shoulders trembling, breath ragged and desperate. A hood covered their face, but their entire body was shaking like a person holding in the scream of 10 years. The detective stepped forward. "I'm not here to hurt you." A startled gasp. The figure flinched, curling further into the shadows. He softened his voice. "I know you were at the gate. I found what you dropped." No answer, only trembling. The detective took another step. "You called me. You warned me. You're in danger too." He reached into his coat and gently placed the crescent moon charm on the floor within their reach. The witness lifted their head. The hood shifted slightly, revealing eyes, tired, hollow, rimmed with fear that seemed to have accumulated over years like sediment in a river. They stared not at the detective, but at the charm, as if the small piece of metal had followed them through nightmares. Slowly, weakly, they whispered, "He saw me. He always saw me." The detective crouched, maintaining enough distance to avoid overwhelming them. "Who?" The witness swallowed hard, their breath hitching. "The man from the factory. The one who took her." Their fingers twitched toward the charm but didn't touch it, as though afraid it might burn. "I was there. I wasn't supposed to be, but I was. I saw him pull her. I saw him drag her. And he saw me." The detective's pulse quickened. "Why didn't you come forward then?" Tears welled in the witness's eyes, catching the dim light. "Because I thought he would find me. Because he didn't stop. He kept coming back. He left things near my building. Notes, objects, a choked breath. He knew where I lived. He knew where I worked. He knew my name. I moved 3 times. I changed everything. But he always knew." The detective nodded slowly. "You survived." The witness shook their head. "I hid." Before he could ask more, a loud thump reverberated through the corridor above them, heavy, deliberate, like a boot connecting with metal. Both the detective and witness froze. Another thump followed, closer this time. Someone was descending the stairs. The detective whispered urgently, "Is it him?" The witness's eyes widened, terror sharpening every muscle. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The detective stood, raising a finger to his lips to signal silence. The witness nodded, shrinking further into the pallets. He moved to the doorway, leaning just enough to see the main hall. The flickering bulb cast long, warped shadows across the printing machinery. Footsteps echoed slow, measured, unhurried. The kind of steps made by someone who knew the layout intimately. Someone who wasn't searching, but confirming. Then a silhouette appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, hooded, walking with a calmness that made the detective's skin crawl. The figure paused near one of the massive rollers, turning their head slightly as if scenting the air. Then they crouched, picking something off the floor. The detective's own boot print. They examined it, tilting their head. Recognition flickered in their posture. They weren't just tracking him. They were expecting him. The detective stepped back into the maintenance room just as the footsteps grew louder. He motioned for the witness to stay silent. But silence could only hide so much. The witness's trembling breaths became too loud in the suffocating stillness. The footsteps stopped right outside the room. The detective's heart pounded. He kept his weapon lowered. Firing here would echo through the entire factory, and he didn't know how many exits the perpetrator controlled. A soft, deliberate tap sounded on the metal doorframe. Not a knock, a signal, a message. Then a voice, low, steady, and horribly calm, drifted through the crack. "I told you not to come back." Not directed at the detective, directed at the witness. The witness's breath broke, a tiny gasp escaping as they pressed a hand to their mouth. The perpetrator continued, voice almost gentle. "You were supposed to stay quiet." The detective stepped into the doorway, weapon raised, now stance firm. "Don't move." The silhouette turned toward him slowly, almost amused. And then, in one fluid motion, the perpetrator extinguished the flickering bulb with a metal pipe. Darkness collapsed like a curtain. A rush of movement surged in that instant, footsteps scattering, crashing metal. A shout swallowed by the dark. The detective lunged forward blindly, hearing the witness scream, hearing the perpetrator bolt through another passage he hadn't known was there. By the time emergency lights kicked in, the maintenance room was empty. The witness was gone. The perpetrator was gone. And on the floor, illuminated by the sickly red glow of the backup lamps, lay a new object placed gently, almost kindly. A second crescent moon charm, identical to the first. But this one was engraved. 2 words scratched in with something sharp. "You're next." The red emergency lights washed the corridor in a color that felt like open wounds pulsing against the concrete as the detective stared at the charm engraved with a threat that wasn't meant to intimidate, it was a promise. Cold metal, fresh engraving. A message delivered with the calm precision of someone who had done this before. Many times, someone who knew exactly how long it would take for electronic locks to glitch during a power shift. How the flicker of lights would blind the eyes for just the right number of seconds. How darkness could be turned into an accomplice. The detective knelt, picking up the charm with a gloved hand, feeling its weight as if it were a second pulse. The engraving wasn't neat. It was carved with urgency, pressure, and tension. A hand that didn't tremble. A hand that understood fear from the outside, never from within. He scanned the basement again. The witness's last gasp still hung in the air, a ghostly echo that tugged at his chest. The pallets were overturned from the sudden struggle. Footprints, messy, overlapping, told a violent, quick story. The witness tried to flee, stumbled, was grabbed, dragged. The perpetrator's larger prints surrounded the smaller ones, circling like a hunter closing in. The detective followed the trail to the side passage the figure had vanished through. A metal grate lay on the ground, pried off with force, revealing a narrow service tunnel snaking under the factory. The darkness inside looked alive, a throat ready to swallow anything that dared step into it. He exhaled sharply, frustration burning through him like acid. The witness had finally appeared, only to be taken away again, pulled back into the same nightmare they had been hiding from for years. And the perpetrator had done it effortlessly, as though leading the detective step by step into a canvas he had painted long ago. Every move felt choreographed, every clue placed with purpose. The detective wasn't chasing a criminal, he was being maneuvered by one. Officers flooded the basement minutes later. Their flashlights swept across machinery like spotlights searching for actors who had already left the stage. Radios crackled with updates. Exits were sealed, streets cordoned off. K-9 units deployed. But the factory was an old beast, built with hidden arteries beneath its floors. Maintenance tunnels, forgotten shafts, abandoned ventilation routes dating back decades. Perfect escape routes for someone who knew its anatomy. By the time responders reached the far end of the service tunnel, all they found was an open manhole leading to city sewers and a smear of ink on the rim fresh enough to smudge the gloves of the first officer who touched it. Ink, printing ink. The detective closed his eyes for a moment, anchoring himself in the rhythm of his heartbeat. The smell returned, industrial chemical cold, the signature scent of whoever had orchestrated this entire labyrinth. The attacker didn't leave fingerprints, but they left a trail of scent memory and fear woven through every step they took. Back at the precinct, the chaos was immediate. Walls buzzed with chatter. Commanders demanded reports. Journalists camped outside like predators circling fresh blood. The detective blocked it all out as he entered the evidence room with both charms in hand. He set them on a stainless steel table beneath harsh white light side by side, identical in shape. One warm from human touch, one cold, engraved, delivered like a blade to the throat. The technician stepped in quietly. "We analyzed the metal composition of the first charm," she said, flipping through pages. "It's not mass-produced, custom-made, a jeweler's work." She paused, then slid over a list. "There are only 3 shops in Berlin that still make pieces like this. 3 shops, 3 potential answers in a city drowning in shadows." Before he could respond, his phone vibrated. Unknown number again. He answered instantly. But it wasn't the witness. The voice was different this time. Calm, deep controlled. A voice that didn't whisper. A voice that didn't fear the sound of its own breath. "You should stop," the caller said. The detective stiffened. "Who is this?" Silence. A faint hum of static. Then the voice returned, soft enough to feel like it was being spoken into his ear. "You're chasing something you don't understand." The detective paced, teeth clenched. "Tell me where the witness is." Another pause, deliberate, calculated. They shouldn't have spoken. A hint of a smile wove through the words. They were doing so well staying invisible. A chill ran along the detective's spine. "If you hurt them, they're alive," the voice cut in. "For now." The detective's grip tightened. "Why are you calling?" "To give you the same chance I gave them." A slow inhale, walk away. "That's not going to happen." A quiet exhale, amusement, maybe even admiration. "Then prepare yourself. You're already part of the story." The line went dead. The detective slammed the phone onto the table, breath sharp. The technician recoiled. "What is it?" He didn't answer. He grabbed his coat and left the room. Needing air, needing movement, needing anything that wasn't the suffocating pressure of those words crawling under his skin. He stepped out into the courtyard behind the precinct where the city hummed with distant sirens and impatient traffic lights. The sky above was the color of fading bruises streaked with pink and violet behind drifting clouds. He replayed the call in his mind. The voice hadn't been distorted. No mask, no fear. Whoever it belonged to wasn't just confident, they were certain. Certain the police wouldn't find them. Certain the witness wouldn't speak again. Certain the detective was now entangled, stepping into a narrative already written. He walked to his car, hand brushing the windshield out of habit, and froze. Another photograph was tucked beneath the wiper, this one larger, printed on glossy paper. He pulled it free and stared. It was the witness. Face partially visible, hood fallen back, mid-struggle, eyes wide with a terror that felt painfully human. They were being held by the arm, dragged through a tunnel, the perpetrator's silhouette behind them. The photo was taken from above, from a distance, as if the attacker wasn't just committing the act, they were documenting it, curating it, archiving it. A handwritten line at the bottom read, "You look too late." His pulse thudded painfully. The world seemed to narrow until all he saw was that photograph. The witness's fear. The perpetrators gripped the dark tunnel, swallowing them. He turned it over. On the back was an address. A single precise location. One he recognized instantly. A derelict residential block near Landsberger Alley, condemned years ago but never demolished. A building with boarded windows, graffiti-covered doors, and a history of complaints no one bothered to follow up on. The kind of place where people entered without being seen and left without being remembered. The detective didn't call for backup. If he did, the perpetrator might vanish again. If he waited, the witness might not survive. He drove with a single goal pulsing through every muscle, reaching the address before it became another scene sealed behind police tape and regret. Berlin blurred past his window's lights, smearing like streaks of urgency. His heart kept pace with the engine, each turn sharper than the last. When he reached the block, the building towered above him like a skeletal monument. Silent, empty, watching. He stepped inside, flashlight slicing the darkness. Dust swirled with every movement. The floorboards creaked under his weight. The air smelled of mildew, decay, and something metallic beneath it, faint but unmistakable. Ink. A door down the hall was ajar. He moved toward it, slowly, boots whispering across the floor. As he pushed the door open, it groaned loudly, echoing down the corridor like a warning. Inside was a small room, walls covered with photos. Dozens, hundreds. Photos of the witness. Different years, different locations, different disguises, all showing one pattern. They had been watched, constantly, relentlessly, without pause. And in the center of the wall, framed by rows of surveillance snapshots, was the most recent one, the witness being dragged in the factory tunnel. Beneath it, scribbled in thick black marker, almost. The detective felt his stomach twist. Another noise echoed through the building. Footsteps. Not fleeing. Approaching. Slow. Heavy. Deliberate. Like someone arriving to finish what they started. The detective raised his weapon, breath slowing into a hunter's focus. The footsteps grew closer. Closer. Then stopped just outside the door. The detective tightened his grip. Silence. Then, a whisper calm and chilling. "You're right on time." The words hung in the doorway like a blade suspended in air, sharpened by a decade of silence, and sharpened further by the fact that they were spoken with a calmness that didn't belong in a room wallpapered with fear. "You're right on time." The detective stood perfectly still. Weapon raised, breath pulled tight in his chest as the silhouette eased into view. The hall behind the figure was swallowed in shadow, offering no edges, no details, nothing but the outline of someone tall, deliberate, built like a presence, rather than a person. The figure stepped forward, slow and steady, the weight of their boots sending vibrations through the rotten floorboards. No rush. No hesitation. A cadence that belonged to someone who believed the outcome of this encounter had already been written. The detective tightened his stance, positioning himself so the photos on the walls wouldn't catch him in the crossfire if things went violent. "Stop moving," he said, voice, steady, weapon unmoving. But the silhouette didn't stop. In fact, the figure tilted its head slightly like someone observing an animal rather than facing a man holding a gun. "You're in my space," the figure murmured, tone disturbingly level. "This room isn't for you. It was for them." His eyes flicked across the photo's surveillance shots spanning years, documenting a life lived under a lens, a witness whose entire existence had become a hunted trail. The detective's pulse hammered against his ribs, but he kept his voice even. "Where are they? What did you do to them?" A soft breath followed, not a sigh, but the faintest hint of amusement. "You're too late to ask that." The detective took a step forward, gun raised higher, now aimed at the figure's center mass. The silhouette finally paused, and for a moment the room froze in a tension so sharp it felt like glass stretched thin. Then the figure lifted a hand, not quickly, not aggressively, but with slow intentionality, as if offering something. A small metallic glimmer dangled between two fingers, a third crescent moon charm. The detective's jaw tightened. "Drop it," he said. The figure obeyed with surprising ease, letting the charm fall onto the dusty wood floor where it landed with a soft, chilling tap. Then the figure lifted both hands slightly, palms visible, still far from a surrender stance. "This is as close as you'll get," he said. The detective moved in, trying to close the distance without giving ground. His boots creaked across the warped wood flashlight beams, slicing through the smoky air. But as the light caught the figure's face, the detective saw it wasn't masked. No distortion. A real face. Human. Ordinary, almost disappointingly. So sharp cheekbones, cold eyes, a small scar beneath the jawline. Not a monster. Worse, someone who could blend in anywhere. Someone the city wouldn't remember, even if it walked past him every day. The figure smiled faintly, almost politely. "You've been looking for me without knowing my name. That's the problem with cold cases. You chase ghosts when the living stand right in front of you." Before the detective could reply, the floor behind the perpetrator creaked, a second set of footsteps, but lighter, quicker, almost frantic. The detective angled his light, and a figure darted across the hall. Small, hooded. The witness. Alive. Alive but running, stumbling, trying desperately to keep distance from the man they had spent a decade hiding from. The detective shifted instantly, stepping sideways to get a clearer view, But that half second of divided attention was all the perpetrator needed. The figure lunged sideways with uncanny speed, sweeping an arm across the detective's wrist. The weapon clattered to the floor, skidding across the wood. The detective reacted instinctively, tackling forward, catching the perpetrator around the torso. They crashed through the narrow room, bodies slamming into the wall photos, raining down like fragments of someone else's life. The struggle was brutal and silent. No shouts, only the thud of fists, the impact of boots, the sharp inhale of pain. The perpetrator moved with calculated strength, not reckless aggression. Every strike was placed with precision, aiming at the detective's joints, ribs, throat. Whoever he was, he had trained for close quarters or lived a life that demanded it. The detective countered with raw drive elbows, forearms shifting weight, brute force. They crashed into another wall, the detective slamming the perpetrator's shoulder against a wooden beam that splintered under the impact. The perpetrator hissed briefly, but not in pain, more like irritation. "You're slower than I expected," he muttered. The detective responded with a strike to the jaw that snapped the man's head sideways, knocking him into a cabinet that shattered under his weight. The detective spun toward where the witness had run, just in time to see them vanish down a stairwell. Breath ragged, he lunged to follow, but the perpetrator grabbed his ankle and pulled hard, sending him crashing to the floor. Dust exploded around him, a forearm locked around his neck. The detective clawed for leverage, vision blurring at the edges, but forced a twist of his hips, breaking the choke, driving an elbow into the attacker's ribs. They separated for a split second, enough space for danger to regrow. The perpetrator rose first, faster than he should have been able to. He yanked a rusted metal rod from the broken cabinet, holding it like an extension of his arm. The detective scrambled for his gun, but it was too far, halfway across the room beneath fallen photographs. The rod swung towards his head. He ducked. It slammed into the wall, driving splinters outward like shrapnel. The detective launched himself forward, grabbing the man's wrist, twisting down until the rod clanged to the floor. The perpetrator didn't break mood. "You're delaying what's already decided." The detective pushed him back, breath burning. "Not tonight." He moved toward the stairwell, but the perpetrator grabbed his jacket collar and yanked him backward, slamming him against a column. Pain shot through his back ribs, screaming. The perpetrator leaned close, breath steady. "You're chasing the wrong ending." The detective swung a fist upward, connecting with the side of the man's face hard enough to send him staggering. He didn't wait. He sprinted to the stairwell. The descent felt endless, narrow, steep, smelling of mold and old sewage lines. The flash of the witness's footsteps echoed through the darkness ahead. They weren't screaming. They weren't calling for help. They were running with the silence of someone who had learned long ago that noise gets you killed. "Wait!" the detective shouted, but the witness only ran faster. He descended deeper, level after level, the building a vertical maze of crumbling concrete and forgotten rooms. Then he heard it, the witness's shoes scraping sharply, followed by a muffled cry. He bolted down the last steps and burst into a basement corridor, lit by a single swinging work lamp. The witness was there on the floor, hands pressed to the ground, crawling backward in terror. And behind them, emerging from the shadows, was the perpetrator. Impossible. He had been seconds behind the detective. No way he could have passed unseen. No way he could have accessed another stairwell without being heard. Yet there he was, standing between the detective and the witness, as if he had always belonged to this place. He smiled, slow, deliberate. "You keep following the wrong path," he said. The detective raised his weapon. He had grabbed it on the way down, without realizing it, aiming directly at the man's chest. "Move." The perpetrator stepped aside, not out of submission, out of strategy, like a chess player sacrificing a piece to force a specific move. The witness scrambled to their feet, bolting down another hallway. The detective hesitated for half a heartbeat, long enough for the perpetrator to speak again. "You can only save one of you tonight." The detective fired. The bullet struck the wall next to the perpetrator. He had dodged before the shot even broke the air. He moved like someone who could predict movement, someone who had rehearsed this confrontation in his head 1,000 times. The detective sprinted after the witness, leaving the perpetrator behind, but he knew this wasn't escape. It was pursuit. The corridor ahead twisted sharply. The witness disappeared behind a broken doorway, and then a sound ripped the air. A scream, then silence. The detective lunged into the doorway only to find a shaft in the floor wide open, descending into darkness. Cold, rushing air rose from below like an underground tunnel breathing. The witness was gone. Pulled. Taken. Again. On the floor beside the open shaft lay the fourth crescent charm. This one wasn't engraved. It was stained. With blood. The blood on the fourth charm hadn't dried yet. It gleamed in the weak basement light, thick and dark, clinging to the metal like a secret that didn't want to be washed clean. The detective crouched for only a fraction of a second, fingers hovering just above the charm without touching it. His breath slowing into something cold and controlled. That blood meant the witness had still been alive seconds ago. It also meant the perpetrator was toying with time itself, pushing the detective just close enough to feel hope, then dragging it away one heartbeat at a time. A gust of freezing air rose from the shaft, carrying with it the stale smell of old tunnels, wet stone, and something else, something faint, but unmistakable: ink. The scent crawled up through the darkness like a memory sharpened into a weapon. The detective gripped the edge of the shaft and shone his flashlight downward. The beam carved through the void, revealing rusted metal rungs bolted into the wall, leading into a drop that seemed to fall forever. The bottom flickered with water reflecting the light, shallow puddles, glinting like a scattered constellation. Faint footprints marked the dust on one of the lower ledges. One set small, one set larger. They hadn't gotten far. He holstered his weapon long enough to climb down. The metal rungs groaned under his weight, flaking rust onto his hands, biting into his gloves. The walls were cold enough to feel alive, absorbing every sound, until his own breathing echoed back at him, distorted and thin. 20 steps down. 30. 40. The air thickened, tightening around his throat, forcing him to breathe through the metallic taste of fear and tunnel rot. At the bottom, he landed silently in knee-high water that rippled around his boots. The glow from his flashlight revealed long corridors stretching in opposite directions, lined with pipes and old maintenance markings barely legible under decades of grime. The witness's footprints splashed ahead toward the right tunnel, erratic, stumbling, the pattern of someone pulled along or trying to resist. The larger prints followed with perfect rhythm, each step identical, the stride of someone who never rushed because they never needed to. Someone who believed every path they took had only one destination. The detective waded forward, water sloshing softly. The tunnel swallowed him whole, twisting sharply. The ceiling lowering until it brushed his hair, then rising again into cavernous echo chambers where sound stretched unnaturally, as if the darkness itself whispered the perpetrator's footsteps back at him. He kept moving until he reached a junction, 3 tunnels branching outward like the mouth of some underground beast. On the wall, smeared in the same fresh blood from the charm, was a crude arrow pointing left. Not drawn with a finger, dragged, a hand, a struggle. The detective quickened his pace. The tunnel narrowed into a long corridor where rusted pipes ran along both walls, dripping water in steady plinks that sounded almost like a metronome marking the pace of fear. His flashlight flickered, struggling against the damp air, forcing him to slap it once to keep the beam steady. Something glimmered on the ground ahead, a scrap of fabric caught on a pipe. Dark blue, torn. The same type of fabric the witness's hoodie was made of. The detective pressed on. The air grew colder, the ink smell strengthening, merging with another scent that made his stomach clench. Bleach. Sharp, fresh, applied recently. The kind of smell used to erase something. The tunnel dead-ended in front of a large maintenance door left slightly ajar. The detective stepped through and froze. The room beyond was vast, a forgotten subterranean chamber once used for machinery, now long removed. The only remnants were massive bolts jutting from the floor and stains on the walls where equipment had once stood. The space was lit only by old emergency lamps, their dying bulbs casting a sickly orange glow that turned shadows into contorted shapes. And in the center of the room, standing perfectly still, as if posing was the perpetrator. Alone, facing him. The detective lifted his gun instantly, but the perpetrator didn't move. He stood with one hand behind his back posture, relaxed expression unreadable in the half-light. His voice, when it came, was almost conversational. "You made good time." The detective's jaw tightened. "Where is the witness?" The perpetrator tilted his head, almost curious. "Always about them, never about yourself." He stepped forward slowly, revealing just enough for the detective to see something behind him, a rope trailing across the floor, leading deeper into the darkness. The detective shifted his weapon to track the movement. "Step back," or what the perpetrator asked quietly. "You'll shoot me, and the only chance you have of finding them alive." The words landed like ice. The detective didn't lower the gun, but he didn't fire. The perpetrator smirked faintly. "I knew you wouldn't." His voice dropped lower, more controlled. "You think this is about a disappearance, about a kidnapping, about fear." He paused. "It's not. It's about order." The detective stepped closer, boots splashing. Order doesn't leave blood on a charm. The perpetrator's eyes narrowed. "Everything has a cost." Then he slowly withdrew his hand from behind his back. Not a weapon, a notebook. Thin, bound in cracked leather. So worn it looked like it had been handled every day for years. The detective's pulse stumbled. The perpetrator held it out as if offering a gift. "You should read this," he murmured. "You've been chasing shadows. It's time you met the architect." The detective didn't lower his weapon. "Drop it." The perpetrator obliged. The notebook hit the wet floor with a soft slap. "Go on," the man said quietly. "Open it." The detective didn't move. Then the perpetrator spoke again very softly, with the weight of truth shaped into something cold. "It's hers." The detective's breath stilled. Hers. The victim from 2007. The woman who stepped into the alley and never stepped out. He stepped toward this notebook, keeping the perpetrator in his periphery. The leather felt cold damp from the floor. He flipped it open. The first page was filled with handwriting he recognized from old evidence files, sharp, neat, precise. Notes from her graduate research, observations on offender patterns, behavioral analyses, fear signatures, survival responses. The pages turned faster now, his fingers trembling, revealing sketches of alleyways, interviews with subjects, annotations about anonymous observer, and then a page torn violently out, the remnants of paper shredded along the spine. Then another missing. Then another. He reached a page where fresh ink bled through, not her handwriting now, but his. The perpetrator's. "You're reading this while I'm standing right behind you." The detective spun, but the perpetrator wasn't in front of him anymore. The man had vanished into the shadows beyond the room, retreating through a side corridor that hadn't been visible before. The detective lunged after him, but a sudden sound snapped him back. A muffled cry. The witness. Alive. Somewhere deeper in the tunnels. The detective ran toward the sound, leaving the notebook behind as he plunged into the darkness. The corridor twisted sharply, then opened into a narrow passage flooded ankle-deep with freezing water. The cry came again, closer this time, mixed with the scrape of a struggle. He turned a corner and finally saw them. The witness kneeling with their back against a concrete pillar, wrists bound, breath shaking violently, eyes wide with terror. "Stop!" the detective shouted, racing forward. But before he could reach them, a hand emerged from the darkness behind the witness, gloved. Steady, familiar, gripping the witness's shoulder. The perpetrator leaned forward just enough for the detective to hear the whisper. "You were always one step behind." Then, the floor beneath the witness shifted, a trap door hidden under shallow water, releasing with a metallic snap. The witness dropped, vanished, into blackness. The detective lunged desperately, fingertips grazing the witness's hood before gravity won. He hit the floor, hard breath exploding from his lungs as the trap slammed shut. Silence crushed the tunnel. The perpetrator was gone. The witness was gone. And carved into the surface of the trap door with a blade sharp enough to slice steel were 3 words. "Last chance begins." The words carved into the metal seemed to vibrate in the stale tunnel air. 3 shallow grooves filled with grime and wet. "Last chance begins." The detective stared at them, pulse hammering in his ears. breath fogging faintly in front of him as the cold from the trap door rose like a warning. Somewhere below, beyond that slab of rusted steel and darkness, the witness was either alive and terrified, or slipping into a silence like the one that had buried the victim in 2007. His fingers dug into the edge of the hatch, the metal biting into his palms, as he yanked muscles straining. It didn't move, bolted from the underside, locked into the bones of the tunnel like it had always been meant to close, never to open. He pressed his ear to the steel, forcing his breathing to still. For a long moment there was nothing. Then, faintly as if traveling through stone and water, he heard it one muffled impact like a body hitting another surface, and then a sound that he couldn't tell was a scream or just the tunnel exhaling. He stumbled back and keyed his radio voice clipped and sharp as he called in his position, demanded bolt cutters, thermal cameras, every tool the city could spare to crack this underground throat open. His words echoed against the tunnel walls, distorted, coming back to him like fragments of someone else's panic. As he spoke, his flashlight skimmed across the concrete, catching something just beside the hinge of the trap, carved into the floor, shallow but deliberate, a series of small vertical lines grouped together. Not random, tallies. 1, 2, 3, 4 slash. Again, again. Rows of them stretching along the base of the wall. Not hours, not days, years. Someone had been counting time down here, marking it where only they could see. Backup arrived in a rush of boots and BART commands, the tunnel filling with the harsh white cones of additional flashlights. The detective stepped aside as 2 officers hauled a hydraulic spreader into place, the mechanical jaws clamping onto the edge of the trap door. The metal groaned in protest as the tool began to push the sound, screeching down the tunnel like an animal being dragged across stone. Rust flaked free in orange bursts. The hinges screamed. The detective's heart beat faster with every growl of metal giving way. Last chance begins. What kind of countdown had the perpetrator started? The hatch finally tore open with a violent jerk, slamming sideways, splashing filthy water onto the men clustered around it. Cold air surged upward, damp and thick, carrying with it the dim smell of earth and old machinery. They aimed their lights down into the new void, revealing another level below a cramped chamber, walls reinforced with concrete, a ladder bolted to one side. The detective descended first, boots rattling against the rung's flashlight pinned in his teeth knuckles, white around his weapon. The others followed the clatter of metal and breath, forming a strange rhythm in the enclosed space. The chamber was small, barely high enough to stand in. Water pooled in uneven patches along the floor, rippling under the disturbance of their arrival. Pipes crisscrossed overhead like skeletal ribs, and on one wall, a crude metal door sat slightly ajar, the lock sawed halfway through. The detective's throat tightened. He pushed the door open with the barrel of his gun. Inside was a room no larger than a walk-in closet lined with soundproofing foam that had gone dark with mold. In the center, a single chair was bolted to the ground, its straps dangling empty, swaying slightly as if recently used. On the floor beside it lay a strip of fabric torn from the witness's hoodie, still damp. The detective swept the beam of his light around the room, jaw clenched. No body, no movement, no witness. Just absence. Absence that felt violent. On the opposite wall, reusing the same piece of concrete that had once been marked only with Tally's new words, had been added in smeared ink, rushed but legible. "You're running out of cold cases." The detectives around him shifted uneasily, the message crawling under their skin. The lead investigator's voice crackled over the radio, asking for status. The detective answered without taking his eyes off the wall, explaining what they'd found, and more importantly, what they hadn't. The silence at the other end of the line held for a fraction of a second too long before the order came secure. The area call in the forensic team widened the perimeter above ground. Again. Always chasing, always late. He climbed back up from the chamber, every rung feeling heavier than the last. When he emerged into the wider tunnel, the air seemed thinner, the walls closer. He found himself staring at the open hatch at the words carved into its surface. Last chance begins. This wasn't just a threat to the witness. It was a challenge to him. The perpetrator wasn't planning to vanish. He was staging an ending, one he controlled. Back at the precinct, the notebooks and photos and charms were spread across the briefing room like a collage of obsession. The detective stood in front of the board that had once been reserved for the 2007 disappearance alone. Now it was a spiderweb threads, stretching from the alley to the factory, from the abandoned residential block, to the tunnels, from the victim's meticulously written notes, to the perpetrator's mocking interjections. The leather notebook recovered from the underground room sat open on the table, pages fanned out with plastic clips holding the most important ones flat. The team had scanned every line of the victim's handwriting, every margin note, every underlined phrase. One section had begun to stand out not because of what it said, but because of what was missing. A series of entries titled Case Study Anonymous Observer, alluding to someone the victim had been studying informally, a personality profile built from patterns she had noticed in public spaces. The early entries were academic detached observations about a figure she kept seeing near certain crime scenes, someone who lingered on the edges, not interfering, not helping, watching. A person who appeared across multiple locations without a clear reason, always solitary, always half-shadowed. She wrote about the psychology of someone drawn to other people's pain, someone unable or unwilling to step forward, yet unable to stay away, a spectator, a mirror, Then the entries shifted the tone, tightening the handwriting, pressing deeper into the page. She began using phrases like, he knows he's being seen, he performs for the possibility of attention. He wants to exist in the space between victim and investigator. Her notes became more personal, less clinical, as if she herself felt watched in the process of watching. The later entries were gone entirely, pages ripped out, careful in some places, violent in others. Those torn edges haunted the detective more than any intact sentence. The forensic team found faint impressions on the page behind one of the missing ones, where ink had pressed through before the sheet was torn away. Using angled lighting and enhancement filters, they coaxed out partial words, fragments of a sentence the victim had written before it was stolen from the notebook and turned into a weapon. She had written, "If I confront him, I become part of his story." The detective read the line over and over until its implications rooted themselves in his mind like something poisonous, part of his story. He thought about the photographs of the witness plastered across the room in the condemned building, about the fresh shots printed and placed under his windshield, about the messages carved into metal and concrete and memory. This wasn't just violence, it was narrative, carefully curated, designed to pull people in. The victim in 2007, the witness for a decade, and now him. He stepped out of his briefing room and into the quieter corridor lined with windows showing the cracked courtyard outside. Night had fallen heavy over Berlin, the city's lights painting reflections on the glass like distant fires. He pulled out his phone and replayed the perpetrator's call from earlier, listening to every inflection, every pause. "You're already part of the story. Walk away." The detective's lip tightened. He wasn't built to walk away. That was the problem. That was exactly what the perpetrator was counting on. An officer approached, holding a manila envelope. The lab finished the analysis on the engraving, she said. On the charm with the "your next message." He opened the envelope, gloved fingers sliding the report free. There was a detail added at the bottom, flagged in red microscopic residue trapped inside the grooves of the letters. Ink mixed with something else. Paper dust. The same type of residue found around the torn pages of the victim's notebook. He felt something click into place. The charms weren't just threats. They were signatures. Each one made with the same blade that had torn through her notes. The same hand that had rewritten parts of her work in his own words. The same obsession that had turned a young woman's study of criminal psychology into a script for his own performance. The detective went back to the notebook and leafed through it again this time, paying attention not just to what was written but to the rhythm, how often she had made entries where the gaps were, where the ink changed from one pen to another. He noticed a strange pattern in the margins of some of the earlier pages, faint marks that didn't match her handwriting. Not letters, not numbers. Tiny crescent shapes scratched beside certain lines. 3 of them spaced across different sections, all near mentions of the anonymous observer. Crescents. He traced them lightly with a gloved fingertip, feeling the shallow grooves. The perpetrator had been close enough at some point to sit with this notebook open, annotating her work in his own twisted shorthand. Maybe after she vanished. Maybe before. The thought made the room feel smaller. He pulled up her last known days from the original file, cross-referencing them with the dates in the notebook. Her final entry before she disappeared was short-rushed, lacking the usual detail. He was there again. He wanted to be seen this time. The ink was darker, the pen pressing harder into the page as if she had been telling herself to remember every stroke. The date of that entry matched the night she walked through the alley. The detective turned to the whiteboard and scribbled a line between her last note and the perpetrator's latest message. Last chance begins. What if this wasn't about a final victim? What if it was about finishing something he started in 2007, a story he'd been writing through other people's fear, now reaching for its closing chapter? His phone lit up again, this time with a different tone. A text, not a call. No number. Just unknown. He opened it. A photograph filled the screen. The witness sitting in the same bolted chair he had seen twice now. In different basements, this time in a new room. Bare concrete walls, a single hanging lamp, no soundproof foam, no visible exit. Their head was bowed, but they were breathing, still alive. On the table beside them, in perfect focus, lay the leather notebook, open, a pen resting across its center. Under the image was the single line of text, "Cold case ends when you read what she wrote about you." The detective stared at the photo until his own reflection blurred across the glass sheath, his jawline cut by the glow. The city's lights flickered behind him, in the window Berlin stretching out like an unsolved equation. Somewhere in its tangle of streets and train lines and buried tunnels, the perpetrator sat with a bound witness and a stolen notebook, rewriting the ending to a story that was never his to begin with. The detective slipped the phone into his pocket, feeling the weight of Charm's notes and years settling onto his shoulders like an unwelcome coat. Last chance begins. This wasn't just a warning anymore. It was an invitation. The photograph burned in his pocket like contraband, like evidence he wasn't supposed to have, yet somehow had been chosen to receive. The detective replayed the image in his mind, with the precision of someone used to building crime scenes from fragments. The witness in the bolted chair, wrists bound, but not bloodied, head lowered, but not broken, chest rising just enough to prove they were still being kept alive for a reason. The lamp overhead, industrial modern, not the corroded relics of the tunnel system. The walls poured concrete with a specific pattern of horizontal seams, the kind used in newer municipal structures, not abandoned factories. The floor clean in a way nothing underground and forgotten ever stayed. No mold, no standing water, no rust. Someone had built this room to be used. Cold case ends when you read what she wrote about you. The text wasn't just a taunt, it was a condition, a demand wrapped in a threat. The detective walked back into the briefing room with that line echoing like a headline. Secret witness held in unknown chamber, killer sets terms, cold case now live. On the board, the victim's portrait stared back at him from 2007, eyes bright alive, unaware that years later her notebook would become a ransom note without a price. He dropped his phone onto the table, the image blown up on the screen, as the team gathered around. No one spoke for a few seconds. They all saw the same things. The witness, the chair, the notebook, but the detective saw an additional detail. Their eyes skated over it first, in the upper right corner. Barely visible, a rectangle of muted color. Paint. Not gray, not white. A faint institutional green strip above the concrete seam. He'd seen that shade before in only one type of place, the kind of low-level municipal facility that hadn't bothered to update its aesthetics since the late 90s. Anonymous, functional, forgettable. He leaned closer, zooming in, fingers steady. There was something else in the top left of the frame, not the lamp this time, but a shadow, a faint curve that didn't belong to the room's geometry, the circular edge of a vent. Not a standard square grate, but a round industrial air duct, the type connected to larger airflow systems. "This isn't an improvised basement," he said quietly. "This is built into something that still runs." They combed through city maps, infrastructure layouts, old blueprints of service corridors, and new additions. Berlin's underbelly spread across the table like a second city one. Most people never saw water treatment stations, electrical substations, storm drains, emergency shelters. In all that tangle of tunnels and chambers, only a handful of locations fit the pattern. Newer concrete circular vents. Institutional green-heavy chairs bolted for safety inspections, not for restraint. Places designed for crisis that had never officially been used. One red circle on the map started to glow in his mind, a decommissioned civil defense wing attached to a still-functioning municipal storage depot on the eastern edge of the city. Most of it had been locked and ignored for years-old fallout rooms left to dust. But not all. Some parts remained accessible for inspection purposes, the kind of phrase bureaucracies used when they didn't want to commit to fully shutting something down. The detective traced the corridor lines with his finger, connecting them to the approximate tunnel routes they'd already explored. The path fit uncomfortably well. Command signed off on a controlled operation. Entry points were identified, cameras prepped, tactical teams briefed with phrases that sounded ripped from a tabloid script potential serial offender, linked to historic cold case live hostage situation, high psychological risk. Outside the building, vans rolled into place under the cover of ordinary night traffic, their presence blending into the city's constant background of motion. The depot itself looked utterly boring. A flat utilitarian structure, sitting behind a fence, fluorescent lights humming, a lone security guard in a glass box, scrolling through his phone like nothing in the world was happening. Inside, however, someone was writing the final act of a story that had begun in a rainy Berlin alley years ago. They breached the first door quietly, not with the explosive spectacle television liked, but with the measured surgical entry of people who understood that sound gave away more than it solved. Hallways stretched out in identical beige and gray, lined with labeled crates, and shelves stacked with folded tarps, sandbags, emergency generators. Normal things for abnormal times. The detective led the inner team toward the back where an old metal door bore a faded label, Schutzraum, shelter. Someone had scratched a crescent into the paint beside the handle. His pulse thudded once hard. He signaled the team. They formed around the door, weapons-drawn breaths synchronized without needing to be asked. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of electricity and the distant city outside the walls. Then the detective gripped the handle and pushed. The air in the shelter was colder, pressed down by low ceilings and decades of stale energy. The walls were that same washed-out institutional green, the floor solid concrete. The overhead lamps, sparse and dim. It smelled of dust metal, and something sharper layered beneath ink again, and the sterile sting of disinfectant. The room opened into a series of connected chambers, each one formerly meant to hold civilians in crisis. Now they held nothing but shadows. "Left clear," one officer's voice murmured. "Right clear." The words bounced off concrete and seemed to die too fast, as if the space itself refused to carry anything for long. They moved deeper until the detective saw it, the doorway at the end of the row light, spilling out from under it in a harsher, whiter beam than the others. A chair's silhouette was visible on the floor in the streak. For a second, his throat closed. He stepped forward. The others held back as agreed. If this was a stage, he was the one the script had been written for. Inside the room matched the photograph almost exactly. Bare walls, one lamp overhead, one table pushed against the far side. The chair sat under the light bolts, gleaming straps hanging loose. Empty. The notebook lay on the table, open to a page he hadn't seen before. No ropes. No witness. No sound. The detective crossed the floor slowly, every instinct screaming that something in the walls was watching him. His gun remained trained on the corners of the room, but his eyes drifted to the notebook with a gravitational pull he couldn't deny. Cold case ends when you read what she wrote about you. The page was waiting. The pen that rested across it was uncapped, the ink still wet at the very tip. Someone had just been here, or was still here just out of sight. He reached the table and glanced down. The handwriting that filled the page was hers. The victim from 2007. The date at the top was from the week before she disappeared. He read, "There is another presence in all of this. Not just the anonymous observer at the scenes, but someone who stands closer inside the cordons behind the tape. Someone who moves between victim and story, who carries their faces home. He doesn't realize he's part of it yet. He thinks he's only documenting. But one day, the story will turn toward him and ask what he's really doing when he stares into these empty alleys after everyone else has gone." His eyes traced further. "Today, I watched an officer walk through a scene as if it belonged to him, his face tight, his questions precise, his frustration real. He stayed longer than the others. He came back after they left. He stood where she fell and tried to imagine her last seconds. That's the difference. He still believes this is about justice. He doesn't understand yet that someone else believes this is about narrative." The detective felt something tightening around his lungs. "I think he will become important. Not to the case as they see it, but to the story as it's being written around him. If I confront the observer, I may drag this officer into the same orbit. If I don't, the observer will keep circling alone. Either way, I can feel the lines closing in." Below the last sentence in different ink, a new line had been added. Slower, heavier. "She chose you before he did." The detective's vision blurred at the edges. That line wasn't hers. That belonged to the perpetrator, scrawled later over her words like graffiti on a memorial. A second line followed beneath it, even smaller. "Cold case, warm subject." He felt eyes on him then. Not from the page, from behind. He turned. The camera above the door was small, nearly invisible. A modern black lens tucked into the corner where wall met ceiling. A tiny red light blinked steady and smug. He raised his gun and fired. The lens shattered in a spray of glass and plastic. The red light vanished. In the silence that followed, his radio crackled. "Movement in the east corridor," a voice reported. "We've got a door open that wasn't before. No visual on target yet." The detective's heartbeat shifted gear. The game was still in motion. The room wasn't the end. It was another scene. Another entry in a notebook someone had been writing in their head for years. He grabbed the notebook, sliding it into his jacket, the pages pressing against his chest like a second unwanted set of ribs. He stepped back into the hallway where the fluorescent lights buzzed as if irritated by their own existence. At the far end, a door he'd seen closed minutes ago now stood wide open, revealing a stairwell sinking down further into the complex. He moved toward it, the tactical team regrouping behind him. Above ground, this would be labeled a shelter, a safe place. Below ground, it was something else now entirely. As he reached the stairwell, a faint sound reached him from below. Not a scream, not a struggle. A voice, familiar, trembling. The witness, speaking slowly as if being guided. He listened. "He said you'd come down here alone." The detective swallowed. He stepped onto the first stair. He chose down. Because chasing a shadow on the surface when someone was strapped to a chair beneath concrete felt like stepping into the headline the perpetrator had already written: "Detective abandons witness to hunt phantom suspect." Because the witness's eyes weren't theoretical, weren't blurred in a still frame, they were there now, wide and terrified behind the glass. Because if this entire structure had been built as a story about how cold cases stay cold, then the only act of defiance that mattered was to put his hands on the mechanism and force it to change temperature. The radio on his shoulder crackled again, the team above calling for direction, asking if they should focus on the runner or prepare to breach deeper sections of the shelter. He ignored it, the sound fading into the background like distant traffic. He moved closer to the glass, scanning the edges where it met the wall. Fitted cleanly. No obvious screws. No hinges. It was a single plate, reinforced, designed to withstand shock. But not invincible. "Listen to me," he said, staring into the witness's eyes, hoping they could read his mouth if not hear his words unfiltered. On my signal, you lean forward, hard. Their brows knit in confusion, terror flaring sharper. Trust me, he mouthed. The speaker system crackled ominously, like the perpetrator was listening closely enough to taste what he was planning. You can't brute force your way through every problem, the man said. Some structures were built to outlast impulse. The detective ignored him. He stepped back, drew his weapon again, and fired 4 precise rounds into the same corner of the glass panel, aiming not to shatter it outright, but to concentrate stress along one edge. The shots ricocheted in his bones, each impact leaving a spiderweb of cracks that crawled outward, delicate and furious. The lights flickered once more. Somewhere overhead, dust sifted from seams. On the other side, the witness jerked, flinching on instinct, then pressed themselves forward as far as the straps would allow, as if pushing into the cracks with their existence alone. Tiny shards began to fall along the bottom edge, ticking softly against the floor. The glass whined under the pressure, a high, unhappy sound. Stop, the perpetrator said the word sharper than anything he'd used before. You're accelerating the wrong ending. That's the point the detective snapped, firing again. The final shot pushed the glass past its threshold. It didn't explode outward the way movies promised. It slumped, fragmented, cracking in slow motion like melting ice before a chunk gave way and fell inward, smashing against the floor in dense, thick pieces. A jagged gap opened at the bottom, not wide enough to crawl through, but wide enough for breath touch and for 1 second hope. The charges in the corners hissed and sputtered, one of them sparking with a threatening fizz. The detective saw it, calculated, and shoved the chair aside with a grunt so its occupant wouldn't be directly under any falling debris if the ceiling came down. He tossed his gun onto the table, grabbed a broken piece of the glass, and wedged it under the edge to pry the gap wider. The sound was excruciating, a chorus of angry fractures traveling through the remaining material. Every action has a cost. The perpetrator whispered, his voice no longer calm but fraying around the edges. You're spending lives like currency you don't own. The witness's hands strained against the restraints, wrists, reddening fingers clawing for the widened crack. He dropped the shard and grabbed hold of their bound arms through the opening, the skin cold under his fingers. Again, he said out loud, not caring how much the microphones picked up. Lean forward. As much as you can. Together, they pulled, using the chair's bolts as leverage, forcing the metal to screech against the floor. Finally, one of the arm straps gave with a snap, the torn leather curling back. The witness gasped, wrenching one hand free, then the other fumbling at the buckle across their chest. Their fingers shook, slick with sweat, but the clasp gave way. They lurched toward the gap, heedless of the jagged edges. Careful, he hissed, grabbing their forearms, guiding them through. The glass sliced into their sleeves, drawing thin lines of blood, but they emerged, collapsing half into his room, half still tangled in the frame. He pulled harder, dragging them over the threshold. They spilled onto the concrete in front of him, breathing in ragged gulps, shoulders heaving, eyes wide with a wild, disbelieving light. The speakers shrieked feedback, ripping through the room like an alarm. You think this is rescue? The perpetrator said, his voice no longer steady, now broken into shards of fury and something unexpectedly close to admiration. All you've done is move the subject from one chamber to another. The structure remains. The witness pushed themselves up on shaking hands, looking around frantically as if expecting the walls to close in. He's not alone. They whispered, this time without the filter of the sound system. He told me that over and over. He's part of something bigger. He kept saying he was just the narrator, not the author. The detective's jaw locked. Bigger how? Who else? The witness swallowed, hard voice splintering. He talked about people who liked their cases unfinished, people who liked numbers, patterns, long-term ambiguity, people who get promoted when there are mysteries to manage. They shook their head, eyes flickering toward the ceiling cameras. He said some cold cases are never meant to be solved. They're meant to be maintained. An ugly chill crawled across the detective's scalp. Maintain the unsolved. Feed the myth. Build departments' budgets, careers on the back of what isn't fixed. The idea scraped something raw inside him. Names, he demanded. I don't know, the witness choked. He never used them. Just the way he said it, like he was part of a system that needed darkness in certain corners. The radio on his shoulder barked in again, finally loud enough to be impossible to ignore. We've lost visual on the target, the officer above ground reported. He slipped the perimeter near the rail tracks. We found another charm on the fence. No sign of him beyond that. A pause. What's your status? We heard shots. He almost laughed a short, humorless exhale. Status. That word felt too small for the rooms he'd just torn through. Subject extracted, bomb rig compromised but not detonated. He replied, eyes still scanning the ceiling. We're not clear yet. This place is wired and he's still inside the city. The witness gripped his sleeve with one hand, knuckles white. You don't understand, they said, voice fraying into a hoarse whisper. The notebook. He said the notebook isn't evidence. It's bait. For people like you. For people who can't leave questions alone. As if on cue, the notebook pressed against his chest suddenly felt heavier, as if its pages had soaked up all the air in the room. He had brought it into this space, into this stage. He had done exactly what the perpetrator wanted, carried the victim's voice deeper into a structure built by the man who'd taken her away. The lights dimmed and then glowed brighter than before, the overhead lamp intensifying to a punishing white. The walls around them vibrated with a low mechanical rumble. Somewhere deep in the concrete, a new system had been activated. The witness clutched their head, wincing. He said there were layers, they muttered, as if remembering something through the fog of fear. He said if you dug down far enough, you'd find a room that looks exactly like where it all started. The detective's heart lurched. The alley. He could see it in his mind, as if he were standing there now. Wet cobblestones, dim lamp-narrow passage between apartment blocks. The place he'd walked through 100 times in his memory, the scene that never resolved, always ending with a vanished figure and an unanswered echo. He turned toward the door. It was closing. Slowly, silently, a thick slab of reinforced metal sliding across the frame like a lid over a box. He lunged, grabbing the edge with one hand while pulling the witness with the other. The door resisted motor humming, pushing back with implacable force. Sweat broke across his shoulders. His muscles screamed. The witness added their weight-bracing feet against the floor, both of them straining against a mechanism that didn't care about human effort. For a moment it stopped. Then, with a grinding shudder, it reversed, sliding open just enough to let them spill into the hallway before slamming shut behind them with a seismic clang. The sound traveled through the shelter like a closing book. The corridor outside was dimmer now, emergency lighting casting everything in red and shadow. The tactical team converged weapons, raised eyes wide at the sight of the witness, half carried, half stumbling by the detective's side. We need out, he snapped. Now. This place isn't secure. They moved as a unit, boots pounding along the corridor radios, barking status updates in overlapping bursts. The shelter felt different, off balance, alive in a new hostile way. Doors that had been open were now closed. Signs that had been clear were now dark. Somewhere in the building, a low-frequency alarm began to drone, not loud, but bone-deep, vibrating through the ribs. As they turned one corner, the detective glanced back and saw at the far end of a crossing hallway a figure standing very still just beyond the reach of the red emergency glow. Tall, hooded, watching. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met, or he thought they did. Then the figure stepped backward into darkness and disappeared, leaving only the faint outline of something scratched into the wall where they had stood. A crescent. He pushed forward, dragging the witness toward the stairwell that led up to the depot level. On the wall near the exit door, another message had been written in quick, uneven letters with what looked like the same ink fed into the shelter's systems. Cold case cracked, cold case closed. He shoved the door open, and they burst into the loading bay, gulping the open air like it was a substance. The city night crashed over them. Car engines, distant sirens, the hum of sodium streetlights, the unremarkable, relentless life of Berlin carrying on inches above the story that had almost turned them into footnotes. Paramedics moved toward the witness. Officers flooded him with questions, demands, protocols. He answered what he could, simplified what he couldn't. His mind still somewhere underground, hearing the perpetrator's voice looping through concrete. Some cold cases are meant to be maintained, not solved. He finally stepped away from the noise and leaned against the side of a van, the cool metal grounding him. For a moment, his hands shook so badly he could barely unclasp his jacket. He forced them, still pulled the notebook out, and stared at it under the yellow wash of the depot lights. The leather was scuffed edges frayed. Inside, her handwriting waited entire sections still unread, entire analyses of patterns and minds and motives still sealed. Somewhere between those lines and the pages torn out, someone had found a blueprint for manipulation and decided to build an architecture of fear around it. He could hand it over to evidence and never see it again. He could take it home and read every word, knowing it might be the very act that chains him to this case for the rest of his life. Above him, the city rumbled, trains crossing bridges, late-night buses sighing through intersections, club music pulsing behind thick walls. People laughed somewhere in the distance. A dog barked. Ordinary sounds. Everyday noise. His phone buzzed. Another message. Another photograph. This time it wasn't the witness or a charm or a room. It was a shot of him taken from behind as he stood in the alley years ago, rain-pouring tape, flapping in the wind, staring at the spot where she vanished. The caption beneath was simple, written in the same sharp handwriting he'd seen steal lines from her notebook. First observer, final subject. The cold case hadn't closed. It had pivoted. He stares at the photograph until the world around him goes muffled, the edges of the depot dissolving into a haze of sodium light and cold asphalt. First observer. Final subject. The words press against his vision so hard they feel like they're being carved on the inside of his skull. The image itself is almost mundane. A man in a rain-soaked coat standing behind police tape in a narrow Berlin alley, head bowed, shoulders squared against the cold. Nothing remarkable. Just another detective at just another crime scene. But he remembers that night, the weight of the air, the way the rain seemed to avoid washing anything clean, and the way he stayed after everyone else left, as if the emptiness might talk to him if he gave it enough silence. He hadn't known anyone was watching. Now he knows someone always was. The paramedics' voices buzz in the background, low and professional, tending to the witness on the stretcher. Oxygen mask vitals check. Whispered reassurances that don't quite land because some kinds of fear don't loosen just because someone tells you that you're safe. The tactical commander is talking into his radio, calling in status updates using words like extraction, no civilian casualties, potential ongoing threat. The phrases slide past the detective like water hitting a wall. He can't quite absorb them. His focus narrows to the photograph in his hand and the notebook in the other. The two objects forming a bridge between 2007 and right now. He tucks the photo next to the notebook, feeling their combined weight like an extra organ. The night air claws at his lungs as he steps away from the flood of uniformed sirens equipment. One of his colleagues calls his name, but he doesn't answer. His legs move on their own, carrying him across the depot yard and out toward the fence, where the city spills outward in rail lines, streetlights, and dark river curves. Berlin isn't quiet, not really, but this far east, the noise becomes more of a distant hum layered with the soft rush of passing trains and the occasional bark of a dog echoing off concrete. He stops at the fence and grips the cold metal, with one hand the wire cutting faint patterns into his skin. Beyond it, the tracks glimmer with a faint metallic sheen under the light stretching toward districts that have learned to live with the idea that not everything under their streets is known. Somewhere out there, the man or men or structure or network or whatever truth sits behind the voice is walking through the city like any other late-night figure. Hands in pockets, hood up, face forgettable. The radio crackles again at his shoulder. They have nothing. The figure near the tracks was quick smart, used the passing train as moving cover left only another crescent charm twisted into the fence links like a signature and a smirk. No usable footage. No clear trajectory. It's the same chorus that's followed this case for years, almost nearly just missed. A pattern of almosts that stops feeling like incompetence and starts feeling like orchestration. He returns to the car because he has nowhere else to stand. Inside, the silence is thicker, pressing against the windows like fog. He sets the notebook on the passenger seat, and the photograph on top of it, the two artifacts staring up at him like an accusation. He knows what he's supposed to do. Bag the notebook, tag it, log it, submit it to evidence. Let it become another numbered item in a chain nobody ever truly holds. Instead, he opens it. The pages whisper as they turn the victim's handwriting, tightening and loosening as she moves between clinical distance and intrusive intuition. Case studies blur into personal reflections. Sketches of alley angles bleed into careful lists of recurring details. The smell of oil and ink. The presence of watchers who never step over the tape. The quiet ways people perform when they think no one sees them. Her words grow more urgent as she approaches the week she disappeared, her calm observations bending into something that looks like dread dressed up as analysis. He finds more references to the anonymous observer, but now they're layered with someone else, the officer who keeps returning to scenes, the man whose face she sketches in the margin, not with detail, but with posture, the way he stands, the way he looks at absence, the way he seems to be talking to someone who isn't there. She doesn't write his name. She doesn't need to. The lines of description fit him too well. She writes about how stories form around crime scenes, how the media, the neighbors, the police all contribute to the narrative, sometimes by what they say, sometimes by what they don't. She writes about cold cases as stories frozen mid-sentence, waiting for someone stubborn enough to keep reading even when the trail of ink disappears. She writes that people like the anonymous observer feed off that suspension, living in the unsolved space. And then she writes something that makes his stomach lurch. If I'm not careful, I'll end up inside their story instead of outside it. The entry ends there. The next page is one of the ripped ones torn clean out. He exhales slowly, fingers digging into the paper's edge. Somewhere between her last intact sentence and the empty space of that missing page, she must have made a decision to follow, to confront, to step into the alley, knowing someone was circling there who saw people as pieces, not as lives. Somewhere between that entry and the torn one, the observer she was studying stopped orbiting and moved directly into her path. He closes the notebook. The car feels too small, too close. He needs air that isn't recycled through vents. He needs to hear the city without concrete pressed over his head. He starts the engine and drives. The streets slide past in streaks of light and shadow. Kreuzberg's bars spill late pedestrians onto sidewalks. Friedrichshain's club lines snake around corners. Prenzlauer Bergs. Windows glow with families finishing late dinners. Life continues. The city is not one thing. It's layers, and tonight, he feels all of them stacked on top of each other, some illuminated, some buried. The weight of what he knows and what he suspects he doesn't sits behind his ribs like stone. He doesn't fully decide where he's going until he's already turning into the familiar street, the memory pulling his hands on the wheel. The alley looks different at first glance. Cleaner, brighter. The nearby buildings repainted, some windows replaced. The graffiti has changed, newer tags layered over old ones, slogans in different colors. The lamppost has been upgraded to LED, the light colder and clearer without the golden blur of the old bulbs. But the bones of the place are the same. Narrow gap between structures, drains along the edges, brick that remembers. He gets out, leaving the car at the corner, and walks the last few meters as if he's stepping into a photograph. The notebook is under his arm. His breath puffs faintly in the air, caught and then erased by the night. The alley swallows city noise the way it always has, turning everything outside its walls into a distant hum. The echo of his footsteps sounds familiar in a way that knots his throat. He stands where he stood in the picture near the taped-off zone that isn't taped anymore. No paint marks remain. No chalk. Time and weather have scraped the obvious signs away, but the memory is layered here, invisible but heavy, and he can almost see the ghost version of that night overlaid on the present, officers moving camera flashes, popping the coroner's van door, slamming the first cordon being set. He remembers the tenant in the window, the one with headphones, and a nervous blink. The man who later said he heard whispers, but no screams. He remembers thinking at the time that the silence felt wrong. Now he knows silence can be curated. He opens the notebook again, finding the page where she wrote about this alley. The description is detailed distances between lights' angles, from which someone could watch, unseen, the way sound travels against the brick. She noted how the space made people's voices sound smaller, how it distorted footsteps, and hid breathing. In the margin next to a sketched arrow pointing to the approximate spot where she would later vanish, she's written a single line. If I disappear, it will be here because this is where the story wants me. He closes his eyes. The city breathes around him. A tram bell rings somewhere in the distance. A door slams. A muffled argument echoes from a nearby balcony. A dog barks once. All ordinary sounds, but beneath them, he hears something else. The awareness that this alley isn't just a location on a map. It's a recurring set piece in someone's script. A place designed to pull certain kinds of people back again and again until they wear grooves into the pavement with their insistence on returning. He feels eyes on him, not like before. Not the sharp, focused presence of a predator watching from a hidden vantage. This feels more diffuse, like the city itself is paying attention. Or like habits are. But habits can be broken. He pulls a small evidence bag from his pocket, the plastic crinkling in his fingers, and slips the notebook inside. The sound is louder than it should be in the narrow space. He seals it shut, pressing the adhesive until it holds. For a heartbeat, he just stands there with it in his hands, staring down at the form the leather makes inside the clear plastic, distorted, distant, contained. He could keep it, lock it in his drawer, read it on nights when his other cases are quiet, let it pull him deeper into the pattern until the lines between his work and this one story blur completely. The perpetrator, the narrator, would probably approve. That's how you maintain a cold case. You keep someone thinking about it all the time, never enough to close it, always enough to feed it. Or he can do the one thing the man never factored into his script. He turns away from the alley and walks back to the car with the notebook still in his hand. The street feels wider once he steps out of the narrow cut between buildings. The overhead lights feel less harsh. The city resumes its usual volume. He gets in places the notebook on the passenger seat again, but this time it looks less like a relic and more like an object in transit. At the precinct, the fluorescent glow feels different than it did hours ago. Not softer, not kinder, just less like a stage light. He walks past the empty desks, the bulletin boards, the piled files of other people's worst nights. In the evidence room, the clerk looks up with tired eyes, probably expecting another late signing of paperwork, another last-minute request for access to something already logged. Instead, the detective places the sealed notebook on the counter and slides it forward. "Tag it to the Berlin 2007 disappearance file," he says quietly. "Mark it as primary evidence, restricted access, chain of custody monitored." The clerk nods, pulling the form toward him. "You're not logging yourself as lead holder," he hesitates, then shakes his head. "Log it to the unit," he says, "not to me." The words feel like they tug something loose in his chest. Not an abdication. A refusal to let his name be the center of the file. The clerk writes stamps, places the notebook into a locked drawer that slides shut with a final metallic click. The sound is both reassuring and faintly brutal, another object swallowed by the system. But this time, it's on his terms. On his way out, he passes the board where the victim's photo still looks out at the room. The lines connecting places, dates and clues, spider web around her face intersecting with newly added photos from tonight. The shelter, the tunnel, the chair, the charms. Cold case cracked secret witness upends everything. The headline he imagined at the beginning of all this feels wrong now. The witness didn't upend the story. They showed how deep it ran. The case isn't cracked like glass. It's open like a book that doesn't have a final chapter yet. He doesn't pull the board down. He doesn't add to it. He just stands there for a moment, nodding once to the younger version of himself in that old alley photo now tacked alongside the others, then turns and leaves the squad rooms. Outside, the sky is starting to pale at the edges. Not dawn yet, but the hint of it. The city is between breaths, the late chaos dissolving into early quiet. He walks for a while with no destination, letting his feet choose until they carry him toward the river. The water moves steadily, indifferent, reflecting limp streaks of light. He leans on the railing and stares at the surface, thinking about lines and loops, about who benefits when stories never end, about how many cold cases aren't failures but structures someone constructed and someone else agreed to inhabit. His phone vibrates once in his pocket. A part of him doesn't want to look. He does anyway. No photo this time, no charm, no threat. Just 3 words from an unknown number. Still watching you. He feels the expected chill, the familiar spike of adrenaline, but it doesn't spiral as high as it used to, because he hears something else underneath now, not just menace, but dependence. The narrator needs him to be watching back, needs the shared gaze, needs the story to keep feeding itself. He locks the phone without replying and slips it away. The city will go on. Cases will come in. Some will be solved. Some will stall. Some will vanish into dusty shelves and whispered what-ifs. Somewhere out there, a man with ordinary features and extraordinary patience will keep carving crescents into the edges of things, will keep testing how far structures of silence can stretch before someone breaks them. But the detective knows something now that he didn't fully understand before tonight. He doesn't have to live inside the story to fight it. He can work around it, through it, against it. He can let the cold case remain formally unsolved while refusing to let it own him. The river keeps moving. Behind him, Berlin shifts, restless and layered, a city of headlines and footnotes of loud crimes and quiet obsessions. Somewhere above ground, in a room lit by a simple lamp, the witness is trying to sleep with monitors watching their pulse and strangers guarding the door. Somewhere below ground, in a tunnel that still smells faintly of ink and old water, there's a trap door with words carved into it that will one day crumble. Last chance begins. It already has. He straightens, pushes off the railing, and walks back into the city, not as a subject, not as an observer, but as something the narrator never really accounted for. A man who knows he's in someone else's story, and chooses stubbornly not to play his part.